Welcome everybody to the 12 Steps in 4 Hours. I haven't done it in two parts in a long time, so it's kind of exciting. Tonight we're going to do steps 1 to 3, and I'm going to give you something to think about at the end of the step 3 presentation. And then tomorrow we'll get together, same time again for starting with step 4, and we'll do steps 4 through 12. A lot of information we'll be going through tomorrow, and we'll do all 12 steps, or get a lick of the ice cream cone, as I like to say. I always think of 12 steps in 4 hours kind of like soul surgery. We're like soul surgeons out there. Some people are in real dire straits, and they need triage right away. And this particular approach that I'm going to show you is a way that we can be helpful to the newcomer that's really suffering, and give them a fighting chance and show them how to, connect to a power greater than themselves and recover from that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So my name's Cameron. I'm a member of Cocaine Anonymous, although I am a member of other fellowships, and I've spoken extensively in AA, NA, in SLA, CODA, Al-Anon, but my primary fellowship is Cocaine Anonymous. This is a Big Book sponsorship presentation. Remembering it only takes a few hours to learn how to work a 12-step program and the rest of our lives to practice it. So we're going to get started. If you'll open up your workbook, page 3, it says, this 12-step workbook guide substitute terms and phrases related to alcoholism to include any acting out or obsessive addiction patterns. By the way, this is also an open meeting. I love doing open meetings. By open, we mean anyone seeking a spiritual moral solution to what ails them, whatever the addictive pattern is, whether it's drugs, alcohol, or an acting out addiction like sex or love, fantasy, gambling, hoarding, whatever. You're all welcome here. And we have found that the 12-step approach has a great deal of efficacy for any and all addictions. So this workbook includes the obsessive addiction patterns such as drugs and all mind-altering substances, sugar, food, overeating, nicotine, gambling, sex, love, fantasy, pornography, overworking, tasking, electronic media, self-harm, mutilation, anorexia, bulimia, overspending, debting, under-earning, cluttering, hoarding, emotions, codependency, and anyone can certainly increase this list, and all are welcome. I think since 1939, when they wrote the original 12-step solution for alcoholics, the recovery solution has been adopted by some 300 different fellowships to date, all looking and using the original 12-step program as a way to find a solution to what ails people. Our format quotes from the 4th edition of the Big Book Alcoholics Anonymous. The English version is the 4th edition that I've quoted from, which is our basic recovery text. Our notes, commentary, gender-inclusive changes are formatted in italics. When I wrote this workbook back in May of 2007, I wrote it out of a resentment. I was kicked out of the last detox in Toronto because I had a habit of delivering a very blunt message to the clients. I'd always open with, I got good news and bad news. The good news is there is a way out. The bad news is you're probably too selfish to do it and you're going to die. And they felt that was a little too harsh. So I got thrown out, and I thought, now what am I going to do to work with others? I can't carry the message in the detoxes. So I came up with the notion I'll start a workshop. And I put this workbook together in May of 2007. And what I've done is I've extrapolated the instructions out of the first 164 pages of the big book. Now, there's about 30 pages of actual instruction on how to do the step. The other 134 pages is commentary on those instructions. Now, it's good commentary, and you should be familiar with it, and you can join Big Book study groups for that. But the actual instructions on how to do a 12-step program is roughly 30 pages, which we've laid out in this workbook. We've also adapted the workbook to read for men and women. We removed the gender pronouns. We did that before it was politically correct to do so. I even removed the pronouns for God, which drove the Bible belters in United States crazy. I had to send them a Word document with the so they could put their gender pronouns back in for God. But I removed all the pronouns. We've added the other addiction patterns. And sometimes we've added notes. But wherever I've altered the original text, I've italicized the text, and I cite where in the big book you can read the original passage. And for further study, as I already mentioned, it suggests you get a copy of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, the whole point of our presentation, everything we do in a 12-step program is designed to do the most important thing is, and that is for you to become sponsors. The whole point of the program is for you to be a sponsor. I said that in Al-Anon. I spoke to an Al-Anon meeting. Of course, in Al-Anon, the battle cry is, I need you to change in order for me to feel okay. And of course, you know, Al-Anon suffer from a lot of codependency and they want to fix everybody. So when I said to the group, you're all going to become sponsors, their eyes just lit right up with delight. And I thought, ooh, that's not good. We had to do a bit of work there. But if you suffer from codependency or those types of afflictions, being a sponsor really is a demanding and an exciting place to be, because you really learn how to set the boundaries between being responsible to people rather than taking responsibility for them. So the whole point is for you to become a sponsor. Now, in the first 88 pages of your big book, before we get into the chapter Working with Others, which starts on page 89, it mentions 124 times in the big book to work with another alcoholic. And they don't mean work with your sponsor. They mean work with the man or the woman that's in the hole, that doesn't know a way out, and show them how to recover. Bill and Bob understood the power and the importance of one alcoholic, of one addict, working with another, helping them find a power greater than themselves, which would solve their problem. When one of the things that I did as a result of doing this program, there's a line in the big book that says, go out and see what other religious people are doing. And I thought, well, I'll go get a degree in religions, and typical addict response. And I was at university and I studied medical anthropology, which is the study of various healing systems. And of course, 12 steps is an alternative healing system. And I was doing this research on a paper, and I came across this Baltimore, Maryland drug study. Now, this was done in the year 2000 in the United States in Baltimore, Maryland, very drug-infested urban center. And they had 500 injection drug users in this test group. And they separated them into three groups. Now, these were cocaine and heroin injection users. And they had a group that had a sponsor, a group that had no sponsor, and a group that sponsored others. And at the end of 1 year, they looked at the efficacy rate, the sobriety rates of those three groups. Now, those with sponsors and those without sponsors, there was absolutely no difference in their sobriety rate, which was roughly 30%. Now, that signifies two things. One, you're just as likely to sober up on your own. And two, having a sponsor is no predication of power. One of the first things I tell the newcomer is, I am not the power. I will fail you. I'm going to probably say something that's going to upset you, or I'm not going to be there when you need me the most. I will fail you as a power. What was interesting about the study, though, is that those that sponsored others, 75% of the group was still sober at the end of the first year. Once again, signifying all the power, all the efficacy of a 12-step program is availed to us by carrying the message to those that still suffer. So helping others is the foundation stone of your recovery. And a kindly act once in a while isn't enough. If you're working with your workbook, you can write right there at the end of that sentence, half measures avail me nothing. Or what I like to say, NHM, which is no half measures. I'm going to refer to just how often no half measures comes up as a suggestion throughout our instructions here. Did any of us ever half measure our addictive pattern? You know, it was always full on for me, right? So when it comes, there was nothing about my drinking or using that was ever half measured. So when it comes to the program, I need to have the same zeal and vigor to connect to a power greater than myself if I'm going to find real recovery. So no half measures. I always think that should be a great slogan in the rooms. Half measures avail us nothing. To show other addicts precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. It's actually the main purpose of this workbook. For the newcomers, we hope that these pages, which is roughly 30 pages that we're going to go through, will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. Basically, what I'm saying is everything you need to recover is laid out in these 30 some pages of your workbook. What we're going to do over the course of 2 hours tonight and 2 hours tomorrow night as we conclude the presentation is we're going to outline the program of action, which a lot of us refer to as a recovery recipe. What I like about the recipe analogy is the big book was written very much like a recipe. And the point is, if you follow the recipe exactly as it's laid out, the end result is a spiritual awakening, an awakened consciousness that connects to a power far greater than the booze, the drugs, or the acting out behavior, and allow us to recover from that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. But it also means we can't leave anything out and we can't put too much in. We got to follow the recipe exactly as it's laid out. And that's what we're going to do over these few hours. We're going to explain how we made a self-appraisal, which is basically our step 4 and 5. How we straightened out our past, our steps 8 and 9, and why we're endeavoring to be helpful to those of you that have joined us here today. It's important for the newcomer to realize that our attempt to pass this recipe, this message on to you, plays a vital part in my recovery and Gloria's recovery and Camilla's recovery and Ray's recovery. It's important that you realize that, we're doing this because what happens is you're actually helping us more than we're helping you. It's a bit of a ripoff when you're a newcomer. And for those of you that have been sponsoring others will understand this. If I had the power to make all of you well, I would do it. I wouldn't think twice about it, but I don't have that kind of power. Now, over the course of these 4 hours, I'm going to impart to you my 18 years of working with some 5,000 newcomers over the course of 18 years. And in that experience, I want to share my experience and the wisdom and the knowledge that I've picked up in working with others to help you be the best sponsor you can possibly be. But I have no more power than you do to sober you up. That is a special relationship between you and a higher power. Actually, as sponsors, what we do is broker the deal. We connect untreated addicts to God and God to the untreated addict. And through that special relationship, which is forged through the 12 steps, we connect to this power and we get well. It really is an amazing thing to be a part of. Every time I've gone through the steps with somebody, I've learned something new about myself. I've learned something new about working with others. I've learned something new about the program. It is a gift that has continued to give to me throughout the 18 years. And I can't recommend it enough that at the end of the presentation that you go out there and start carrying the message to those that still suffer. And that's why we say it's actually helping us more than it's helping you. You're under no obligation to us. We only hope that you'll try to help other addicts when you escape your own difficulties. And we suggest that it's extremely important to place the welfare of other people ahead of our own. One of the very first paradoxes, and there's lots of paradoxes in our program, the very first paradox we learn is that in order to get well, it's not a selfish program. You ever been in a room where people say, oh, this is a selfish program? I got to work on me first. I never see them stick around the rooms. That's not what the program's about. The program is, whenever I worked on my sobriety first, I could never stay sober. But when I cared more about you and gave to you unconditionally and lovingly and tried to help you get well, my sobriety was always taken care of. I don't know why it works that way. It just is. Call it the law of harvest, or you reap what you sow, or karma, but it's just the spiritual dynamic of the program. You can make a note if you like here. You get to keep it by giving it away, pay it forward. You get to keep it by giving it away, pay it forward. A great American salesman in the United States, Zig Ziglar, used to say, you can get everything you want in life just by helping others get what they want. And that's kind of the bottom line. We hope that throughout this presentation, our self-revealing accounts will not be taken in bad taste. Although I wouldn't worry too much about that. I've really toned down my vulgarities and my colorful metaphors and tried to be as inclusive and helpful as possible, rather than being just a misogynistic, arrogant prick. Hopefully I've made some progress in that respect. Our hope is that anyone who suffers from addiction, men and women desperately in need, will see these pages as we go through them. That by fully disclosing ourselves and our problems, that you'll be persuaded to say, you know what, I'm like you and you're like me, but you don't do it anymore, and I want what you got. That's really what we're trying to achieve when we carry our message to another addict who suffers. All of us have our own story. We all have a story, right? And somewhere in our fellowships, there's an ear that desperately needs to hear your story. And they identify and they go, you know what? I'm just like you and you're just like me, but you don't do it anymore. Can you show me how you got what you got so I can get well too? And we start that wonderful journey of 12 steps. This brings us to step 1. We admitted that we were powerless over alcohol, drugs, our acting out behavior, that our lives had become unmanageable. Now, the question is on step 1 is, what does it mean to be powerless? What does it mean to be unmanageable? How do you know I'm powerless? How do I know you're powerless? Or your life is unmanageable, or my life is unmanageable. So there's a process in the rooms when we're sharing our stories of what we were like and what happened and what we're like today, that there's an identification that takes place. Now, behavior patterns vary a lot within an addiction. Now, I'm an intravenous cocaine user. I like the needle. So if I'm working with a marijuana addict and I start sharing how I use needles, is the marijuana addict going to understand anything or identify with me? They're going to look at me like I got 3 heads on. You know, so how do I identify, even though my behavior patterns vary from another's? And if you ever work outside your own addiction, like I'm an alcoholic drug addict, but I've worked successfully with codependents and cutters and hoarders and gamblers and sex addicts and love addicts and food addicts. How can I identify when I don't even share that particular pattern of addiction? You know, even in alcoholism, I'm an everyday bourbon drinker. But I've worked with alcoholics who drink beer only, who drink wine only. I know people that are binge warriors. They just drink on the weekends. I've worked with alcoholics who are blackout drunks. I've worked with alcoholics who are blackout drunks who smoke crack cocaine in order to drink longer. They're not crackheads. They're not crack addicts, but they smoke crack in order to drink longer and not black out. So even within an addiction, behavior patterns can vary greatly. So how do we identify? How do we qualify? I always say, just because your boss thinks you have a drinking problem because you wore a lampshade on your head at the Christmas office party doesn't make you an alcoholic. Doesn't make you a lamp either. So how do we identify? And what I love about our big book is it gives very specific instructions on how we carry the message to those that suffer. So the message, as it goes on to say, that which can interest and hold addicted people must have depth and weight. Now, the depth and weight that we're looking for, the hair that we split is control. If any one of you could control what you love to do, would you be on this channel listening to this dickweed talk for 2 hours? I don't think so, right? You know, we'd all be doing what we love to do. But the depth and weight we have is once we do it, whether we're drinking, using, or acting out, we lose all control. That seems to be a very common denominator that adds depth and weight from one addict to another. It goes on to say, tell the newcomer enough about your drinking, using, or your acting out habits and symptoms and experiences, and encourage them to speak for themselves of themselves. You know, when I work with other addicts, and I might not understand their addiction, but over the years, I've come to understand many of the addiction patterns out there, because one of the first questions I ask the newcomer is, tell me what it's like for you. Tell me what your spree looks like. And they teach me all about their addiction pattern and their lack of control. And that just helps me to be a better sponsor. And I love that approach. So I share some experiences with you about my drinking, my using, and how little control I have. I have no control. And you share with me about your addiction pattern. It goes on to say, tell them how baffled you were, how you finally learned that you were sick. Remember that point, that moment when you thought, I don't drink, I don't use, I don't act out like my friends do. There's something different about me. Y'all remember when that happened? I'm different from other people. I'm different from my wife who has a drink once in a blue moon. She has a drink. She gets a little nauseous, a little sleepy. She doesn't like it and she stops. I never got that experience when I drink alcohol. It's always like, wow, this is great. I want more, and I want to be this way 24/7. And I realized I wasn't like other people, and there was something wrong about me because I wasn't getting better. I was getting more and more dysfunctional as the years rolled on. It goes on to say, give them an account of the struggles, of all the ways you tried to stop but failed, that you made to stop. What are all those different struggles that you've tried to stop but failed at? And then the last thing it says, show the newcomer how the mental twist, how our mind lies to us, which leads us to that first drink, that first drug, or that first thought or act, which sets us out on that uncontrollable spree once we start it. It goes on to say that men and women, and this is a great passage, all addicts experience this pattern that I'm about to go over, whether they be drug addicts, alcoholics, or acting out addiction. They all experience the same pattern of behavior. Men and women drink, use, or act out essentially because they like the effect. You all like the effect, right? Now, if you're working with someone, they go, no, I don't like it anymore. What are they really saying? They don't like the consequences. But they love the effect produced by the drugs or the alcohol or the acting out behavior. And that's kind of the physical reaction. Even a gambler, I remember I went to a GA meeting and they thought they were different, but they had the same physiological need for more once they started placing bets as I do when I do a drug or I have a drink of alcohol. That phenomenon of more, I want more. And if that's your experience, you can circle yes. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit is injurious, do you admit that your drinking, using, or acting out behavior is injurious? Not only to your life, but the lives around you. And if so, circle yes. And they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. In the margin, if you're writing in your workbook, write, I'm a liar. I'm a liar. I got this liar that lives in my head, and the liar loves the effect produced by alcohol and drugs, and it doesn't want to give up drinking or drugging under any situation. So what my liar has done, now our big book calls it the mental blank spot, that strange phenomenon that parallels our sound reasoning, but I call it the liar. My liar lives in my head, and it's built this research institute in my brain called Bullshit Inc. And it researches new ideas and new excuses and new reasons that even though my life has been burned to the ground, it's destroyed, this time when I have a drink or a drug, it's going to be okay. And here's the problem. The liar would always win the argument. Y'all relate to that liar that lives in our head convincing us that this time it'll be all right? And that's a problem for us because the liar always wins the argument. It goes on to say that to them, their addict life is the normal one. For me to be high or drunk is normal. Being straight is not normal for me. I don't like being straight. Normal for me is to be high or drunk. And that's I love that statement. It goes on to say that we're restless, irritable, discontented. I add to that list bored, depressed, anxious. These are symptoms. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like feeling that way. So my solution is to drink and use. See, drinking and drugging isn't my problem. It's my solution. Running out is a problem. But the drinking and drugging is my solution to that restless, irritable, discontented situation. And remember when we first started it, when we first started drinking or started using or acting out in the way that we did in the early days, it seemed like the answer, right? Like, yeah, this is the way I want to feel. And it seemed like the answer in the beginning, but as the years roll out and the illness progresses, it turns into something quite different. And it goes on to say that we're restless, irritable, discontented, bored, depressed, anxious, unless we can again experience the sense of ease and comfort. There's that physical reaction to it, which comes at once, which comes fast. That's why I do it, because I get my relief fast by taking a few drinks, a few drugs, or having those first few thoughts or acts, which I see other people doing with impunity without consequence. Some people call them the normies or the non-addicts, the earth people. I call them muggles. That's a Harry Potter term for non-wizard. I call them muggles. My wife's a muggle. She's a JDD girl. Just don't drink, which is really the solution. But for some reason, I can't seem to implement it. I'm kind of like a dog that returns to its own vomit. You ever seen a dog eat something that makes it foully sick? It throws it up, and then it eats the vomit, only to throw it up again, only to eat the vomit. That's what I'm like as an untreated addict. I'm like a dog that continuously returns to the vomit, knowing it's going to make me sick, but my liar convinces me this time when I eat it, it's going to be okay. It goes on to say, after they succumb to the desire again, as so many do, and if that's been your experience, circle yes, the phenomenon of craving. See, it started off where I could take it or leave it, but as the illness rolled out, once I started, I couldn't predict what it was going to look like. I'd like to tell you I'm just going to go to the pub, have a pint, couple shots of bourbon, and come home. And it might last just an evening, but it could go on all night. It could go on all day. It could go on for a week, a month, a year, longer. I have no idea once I start. And then eventually I emerge from the spree where I have no control over my consumption or my acting out, and I'm full of remorse and horror and hopelessness. I go, my God, I can't go on like this. I got to stop. And I make a firm resolution not to do it again. We've all done that, right? Never again. I'm not going to do it. And, if you hooked up any addict when they come off a spree and make that resolution, I'm convinced if you hook them up to lie detector tests, it would register as truthful for all of us. But what happens? We know we can't live with the addiction anymore, but we don't know how to live without it. And then we're told, go to meetings, go to meetings, go to meetings. And a lot of meetings, they don't have the solution. They're what I call open disgusting meetings, where you sit in a circle and it's problem, problem, problem. There's no cross sharing or cross talk, no opportunity to be helpful to those that are struggling. It's like group therapy without a therapist, like an incessant Oprah wine fest. And by the end of the meeting, I'm a psychological casualty where I didn't get any experience, any strength, any hope, and now I need a meeting to fix the meeting I was supposed to get that at. You ever been to a meeting like that? They're awful meetings. And one of two things happen. The person who's sitting there not getting any solution starts getting irritable, restless, discontented, bored, depressed. The liar comes out of remission, says, hey, we need our solution, and they succumb to the desire, and out they go. The other thing I see happening is they go into sodriety, and they sit there and they get more restless, more irritable, discontented as the days and weeks go on, and they go insane, and they end up taking their own lives. In 18 years and some 5,000 people I've worked with, 41 are dead. And out of the 41 that are dead, 9 took their own lives in sobriety. They hung themselves sober because they were completely insane. They would not work this way of being, and they went nuts. And the suicide rates in 12 steps today, and this is in the Oxford Handbook to Psychiatry, is 80 times higher than normal society. 80 times. An untreated addict in the first 5 years of being sober is likely to take their own life. And that's a real problem in the rooms. It goes on to say that this pattern where we do spree, remorse, resolution, spree, remorse, resolution, that wheel of misfortune, pursuing our love of drinking, using, or acting out to the gates of insanity or death. Raise your hand if you know someone who's died from addiction, right? If you got it, it's a death sentence. And there's nothing we can do to stop this train wreck. It's repeated over and over and over again. If that's been your experience, circle yes. And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change and you go, what? What's that? They're alluding to a solution. I'm not quite sure what they mean by that, but they tell me this entire psychic change, there's very little hope of our recovery, meaning I'm going to relapse. Why? Because the liar always wins. So when I'm working with addicts and I'm trying to figure out how powerless are they, how powerless do they understand me to be, and how unmanageable our lives are, I use this analogy. It says addicts are like drowning men and women. And if we don't find some way of keeping our heads above water, we're going to drown. So we look for some kind of power to keep us afloat. And we notice there are logs, like a log floating on the surface. And I think, oh, I'll swim to the log. I'll hold on to the log. It'll keep my head above water. But as a power, it might keep my head above water a day, a week, a month, maybe a year or more. But at some point, the log fails me as a power and I slip and drown. The last sentence of this italicized paragraph, if you've got a highlighter, you can highlight it. Logs are best described as easier, softer ways, middle of the road solutions, and half measures. Now, if you turn to the top of page 5, I have what I call as a log and loser list. And it helps greatly to illustrate the powerlessness and the unmanageability. You can write across the top of your sheet, my rap sheet. For those of you who have criminal records, you know what I'm talking about. My rap sheet, or my modus operandi, my MO, as an untreated addict. So the first part is my log list, admitting powerlessness. Now, the first log you'll notice is willpower. Isn't that the first log we all burn? We try to muster up the willpower, but it fails to hold us in check. Somehow we end up relapsing. And along with that log comes resolutions, oaths, promises, contracts, controlled drinking, using, or acting out. We've all tried those approaches. Now, I'm not going to go through it today because of our time factor, but at some point, go through this list and check off all the different strategies you've tried yet failed at. What I like about the log list is I've checked off everything on this log list with the exception of jail and incarceration, where I have not yet, and I doubt that would have sobered me up. But all the others I've checked off. And what that tells me is nothing secular, nothing human is going to keep me sober. I've exhausted all my opportunities. Now, when I share my logs with you and you share your logs with me, a couple things happen. One, depending on the number of logs you've checked off, it tells me as a sponsor just how powerless you are. And you, as the prospect or the newcomer, realize how powerless I am, because I've checked them all off too. And we begin to identify, hey, you're like me and I'm like you. You're just as powerless as me, yet you don't do it anymore. And that's very compelling to someone who wants to stop but can't stop. The other great thing about a log list is it's a summary of the first 43 pages of the big book. First 43 pages of the big book is step 1. And there's no power in step 1. We die on step 1. So rather than reading 43 pages, we can surmise what's going on in step 1 in basically 3/4 of a page with a log and loser list. And that's very helpful. The other thing about a log list is it's universal. Whether you're a drug addict, an alcoholic, sex addict, food addict, cutter, hoarder, gambler, sex, love, whatever, all addicts burn the same logs. So I'm able to identify with any addict in using this approach. Any and all addictions go through the same logs. Now, unfortunately, it wasn't the log list that drove me into the rooms. It was the second part, the loser list. And the loser list, see, I love drinking and drugging so much that I'm willing to risk my life. And when I'm on that trajectory to the gates of insanity or death, I'm losing stuff. So I created this loser list, and I checked off everything on the loser list with the exception of my license. I never learned to drive, so I never lost a license, but I lost everything else. Now, like the log list, a loser list is universal. All addicts lose the same things. They're all on a trajectory to the gates of insanity or death. And again, what it tells me when we do a loser list, as the sponsor, it tells me how close you are to the gates of insanity or death. And for the newcomer, it gives them that grave conclusion of how close they are to the gates of insanity or death. And that's to our advantage as sponsors, trying to encourage the newcomer to work these steps and find a way out of their predicament. And so I find that using this as a tool is very helpful as a sponsor, because it lets me understand you. And in sharing it with you, you understand me. And we get to that all important conclusion. Hey, I'm like you, you're like me, but you don't do it anymore. And I want what you have. And we're able to establish a really good relationship very early on in the 12-step recovery process with the newcomer by sitting down and just doing a log and loser list with one another. Next time you work with a prospect, try it out. You'll find it, I think you'll find it quite illuminating. So having done this work now I can get down to these all important diagnosing questions. If when you honestly want to, now I meet a lot of people that come to the rooms, they know they need to stop, but they don't necessarily want to stop. But those that cross that proverbial line to where they know they need to stop, but they want to stop, things start to take on a different kind of traction. And you find you cannot quit entirely. And now watch, this is how I use the log and loser list. Do you honestly want to stop drinking, using, or acting out? Ideally, that's a yes. And based on your log list, have you been able to stay stopped? And most people I work with circle, no, I can't stop. And if when drinking, using, or acting out, you have little control over the amount you take, then you're probably an addict. Do you exhibit little control when drinking, using, or acting out? And in most cases, that's a yes. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Meaning I'm a loser without it. Because everything in my log list tells me I will drink, I will use, I will act out again. And for me to drink, use, or act out puts me on a trajectory to the gates of insanity or death, where eventually I'm going to lose my mind or my life. And that's a really awful conclusion to come to. So if you turn to the top of page 6, this is by no means a comprehensive picture of the true addict, since our behavior patterns do vary, but this description should identify you roughly. So once again, using the log and loser list as your basic tool, based on your log list and loser list, does this description of an addict describe you? In most cases, I get a very resounding, yeah, that's me. So now we can do that step 1 instruction. We learned that we needed to fully concede, there's that no half measures, to our innermost self, not to me. Who are we trying to defeat? The liar that lives within. We're trying to defeat the liar, to concede to our innermost selves that we were addicts. Do you fully concede that you're an addict? Yes or no? This is the first step in recovery. And the delusion, the lie that we're like other people or presently may be, has to be smashed. Now, with the phrase presently may be, if you're working with your workbook, circle that and write, the liar creates doubt. This liar that lives in my head, for the most part, is in remission as a result of working the program. But every now and then, the liar kind of peeks out and tries to convince me that I'm no longer an addict. That's the way the liar works, right? And the liar is always trying to create doubt. Oh, Cameron, are you really an addict? Come on, you've been sober 18 years, Why don't we go have a bourbon and find out? Thankfully, I work a program where I can easily control that desire. So are you convinced you're an addict? Yes or no? Now, I got good news and bad news. First, the bad news. The bad news, we are without defense against the first drink, drug, or obsessive compulsive act. Why? Because the liar always wins the argument. So based on your log list, is that your experience? Yes or no? And the idea that somehow, someday, the idea or the lie that somehow, someday we'll be able to control and enjoy our drinking, our using, our acting out is the great obsession of every abnormal person, right? Every abnormal obsessive compulsive. And over any considerable period, we get worse, never better. It's progressive, and many pursue it to the gates of insanity or death. So based on your loser list, based on all the things you've lost and where you're at today, is that your experience? How close to the gates of insanity or death are you? A note to make at the end of this paragraph: when my mind and body heals, the liar returns and tells me it's okay to drink, use, or act out again. When my mind and body heals, the liar returns and tells me it's okay to drink, use, or act out again. This is the problem with the untreated addict. We may be sober, but if we don't have a program to live without it, our mind starts to heal, our body heals, and then the liar comes up and says, hey, we're good to go again. And off we go, because the liar wins the argument. That's the bad news. So you are now properly armed with the facts about yourself, which basically means, congratulations, you're going to die. Now, if you want to be a real jerk, just stop here. That's an awful place to start. Man, how many times have you been to a room where that's all we hear in the room? Problem, problem, problem. And it's like, oh my God, I'm going to die. That's not what the room's about. The room is where we express the experience, strength, and hope that there is an answer, there is a solution. And that's the good news. There is a solution. Now, if you are seriously addicted, as we were, we believe there's no middle of the road solution. Are you convinced at this point, based on your log and loser list, that there's no middle of the road solution? And if so, circle yes. We are in a position where life is becoming impossible. If my life was not impossible, if the loser list had no depth and weight, I wouldn't be doing this presentation. I'd be doing cocaine and drinking bourbon right now, but I can't, because life becomes impossible when I do. So based on your loser list, is life becoming impossible? Yes or no? And if we passed into a region from which there is no return through human aid. Now, that's a pretty intense statement. So based on your log list, are you beyond human aid? I checked off all my logs. I was out of options. I couldn't think of anything human or secular that was going to sober me up. So I come down to two alternatives. One to go on to the bitter end. Oh, God, just kill me now. Blotting out the consciousness of my intolerable situation. Or to accept spiritual help. And this we did because we honestly wanted to and were willing to make the effort. Are you now ready to accept spiritual help? Are you willing to make the effort? Yes or no? And if you got a good log and loser list, chances are that's going to be a yes. And strange as it may seem to those who do not understand, the muggles, the normies, who had so many problems they despaired of ever solving them, suddenly, quickly, fast, find themselves, and I love this line, easily control our desire to drink, use, or act out. That's the key. Because every now and then I get a desire, but I can easily control it, whereas untreated, it would turn into an obsession, and I would succumb to the desire. But I easily control my desire to drink or use. In fact, for most of the time, there's no desire whatsoever. And the only effort necessary is that we be required to follow a few simple rules, to follow the recipe. If you turn to page 31 of your workbook, I want you to look at this diagram here, the wheel of misfortune. So if you look at this model where we come off the spree, we're full of remorse, and then we want to quit. But what do? When we're in the wheel of misfortune, we grab a log, the mental blank spot hits, the liar wins the argument, and I put that first drink, drug, or thought or act into play, and that puts me on another spree. And round and round and round I go, pursuing my love of drinking, using, or acting out to the gates of insanity or death. This is what we call the world of self, the world of no power. Based on this model, can you quit? And the awful conclusion is, no, I'm going to keep going around and around till I die or go crazy. We call it the wheel of misfortune, the bad news. Now, ideally, where we're at today is what we call this proverbial bottom. Some people call it the turning point. Some people call it the jumping off place. And this is where I know I can't take another lap around the wheel of misfortune, but I have no idea how to live without it. But we meet people in the rooms who have found a way out. So we get a sponsor or a guide or a sharing partner or spiritual advisor who can show us how to work the program. And we climb out of the hole. Now, climbing out of the hole, I have a note here, power is uphill all the way. A lot of addicts don't recover because they're lazy. It takes energy to climb out of the hole. But the hole we're climbing out to and the world that we're moving to, and what we're going to show you over the next few hours, is this world of spirit, this world of power where we have recovery, our 3 legacies, our 12-step program, our fellowship, the unity of our program with the 12 traditions, and the service structure of our program where we get involved in service at the group level, the area level, the world level. And this is the world where we experience God, or what people call a spiritual experience, spiritual awakening, psychic change, 4th dimension, God consciousness. And this is the good news. This is what we're seeking, power, the power to easily control our desire to drink, use, or act out. Now, to get there, we realize that there are certain essentials that need to be in place. So if you go to the top of page 7, the essentials of recovery, if you really want to get down knit and gritty, beside the essentials of recovery, right, I'm a loser without them because my log and loser list tells me I'm going back out. But the person I'm working with who has found a way out says, well, there is a way out, but you need certain essentials to do that. So let's take a look at that. Rarely we've seen a person fail, a newcomer fail, who has thoroughly followed our path. Look at that word thoroughly, no half measures. Those newcomers who do not recover are people who will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest. Remember, the liar is strong in a lot of people, and if you're incapable of being honest, man, that's a bad place to be in. And I've worked with some people that are just incapable of being honest and they don't get well. And they're usually men and women that just constitutionally can't get honest with themselves. We thought we could find an easier, softer way. Hey, if anyone here finds an easier, softer way, I hope you would give me a call and let me know, because I haven't found it yet. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. And based on your log list, is this your experience? Half measures availed us nothing. Now, this next passage are statistics from the 1940s when they were measuring the efficacy of the 12-step Alcoholics Anonymous program. Of the alcoholics who came to AA in the 1940s and really tried, like no half measures, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. They remained recovered. And 25% more sobered up after some relapses. And there's that 75% recovery rate, just like the Baltimore, Maryland drug study showed in the year 2000. And among the remainder who stayed on in AA showed improvement. Thousands came to a few AA meetings, and at first he said, no, this isn't for me. Spirituality, God, I don't think so. And they didn't want the program. What they were really saying is, I need to go out, burn some more logs, add to my loser list. And that's what they did. They went out, they tried it their way. It was a log. They burned it. They added to their loser list. And what happened? Great numbers of these, 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed. Now, we find that no one, including all of you, need have difficulty with the spirituality of our program. Willingness, honesty, open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery. But these are indispensable, meaning I'm a loser without them. So when we're working with our prospects, what we want to have is an understanding. Now, the first understanding I need to have with the prospect is that they have the essentials of recovery in place. Are they willing? Are you willing to show up and do the work? Yes or no? I know there are 57 willing people here with us right now because you showed up and you're doing the work. That's all willingness does. So the next time you work with a prospect, rather than give them your number, book an appointment with them. You'll get a much higher return on your work with prospects if you book an appointment rather than give them your number. And you can get them, and if they show up, you know you got a willing prospect. The next thing is honesty. Will you answer questions honestly with a simple yes or no? I've asked a number of yes or no questions. Have you been honest with yourself? Watch out for the yeah, buts, and the maybe. Are you willing to do whatever it takes to get well? Yeah, but, well, maybe. You know what? You're working with someone who's a waste of time when they're like that. It's either or. Either it's a yes or a no. They might say, no, I'm not willing. They're being honest, but we need to work on that willingness component. And the third thing is open-mindedness. Will you lay aside any prejudices, experience the program, and assess the results for yourself? That's all I ask. Just experience the program. You be the judge whether or not it works. A great phrase to describe open-mindedness, you can write this down if you like. When I know I don't know, then I know I'm ready to know. I love that. When I know I don't know, then I know I'm ready to know. That's a good apt description of open-mindedness. Now, that's only half of the equation. You as a prospect also have to have an entire confidence in me as a sponsor. So my job is to explain the approach and try and win your confidence. We realize, hey, Cameron, I'm just like you. You're like me, but you don't do it anymore. I want what you got. That's what we're trying to forge here. Now, there's three things that come into play to win a newcomer's confidence. Number one, we're ex-problematics who have found a solution, who has found a recipe. That's number two. That's the second thing. Who's properly armed with the facts about themselves. That's number three. So they're ex-problematics, they have a solution, and they know what it means to be an addict. Those three things come together, presents a very compelling picture to someone who's untreated, who can't stop, who wants to stop, and they meet you. Can generally win the entire confidence, no half measures, of another addict in a few hours. You want to win their confidence? Sit down with a prospect and do a log and loser list. Share your log and loser list, get them to do one and share it with you. We're fishing. I call it trolling for dickweeds. I love the term dickweed. Online definition of dickweed, a total loser. I always love a good total loser because they seem to be very willing. And so I fish heavy. When I'm in the rooms and I'm looking to carry the message to someone, I'm sharing my log list. I'm sharing my loser list. And they're realizing, man, that guy's just like me, but he's been sober 18 years. How is that possible? And, I never have a shortage of people to work with. I'm winning their confidence in identifying with them based on my log and loser list. Because they identify too. They go, yeah, I've tried that. I've tried that. That didn't work, and so on. And until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. So, top of page 8, some instructions about sponsorship. That the person who's making the approach, now we make the approach, folks, as sponsors, armed with the facts about ourselves, it's our responsibility to approach the newcomer. They don't know who to work with in the rooms, especially you women. Especially in some of those pros, you watch out for your sisters in the rooms. I remember I worked with a crystal meth addict out of Houston, and she'd call me up crying because when she went to her AA meeting, the guys were hitting on her and groping her. And I'm thinking, where are your sisters? Why are they not looking out for you? So let's look out for our brothers and sisters when they're in the rooms. You see someone signify they're a newcomer or picking up a newcomer chip, you approach them. Hey, have you been here before? Do you have a sponsor? Would you like to learn how to work this program, et cetera, et cetera? You make the approach. Watch out for your brothers and sisters who have had the same difficulty. We share the same log and loser list. That they obviously know what they're talking about. I meet a lot of people that kind of know what they're talking about. And then I've met a lot of people who have no idea what they're talking about. That their whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that they're a person with a real answer. Deportment shouts. Look at the person. Are they walking the talk? Do they walk the talk? I know a lot of people can talk the walk, but they don't necessarily walk the talk. Are they walking the talk? Do they signify to you that this is a person who has recovered and you want what they have? That they have no attitude of holier than thou. We're not saints. I am no saint, folks. Much as I'd like to have you think of me as a saint, I am not a saint. Nor am I going to be a preacher or a crusader or a mission maker. And I don't think any addict appreciates that kind of an approach anyhow. Nothing whatever except a sincere desire to be helpful. My only desire here today is to be helpful. I expect nothing for it. You know, it's just freely given as it was freely given to me. There are no fees to pay. You know, Bill Wilson, when he wrote the Traditions, really understood that there are no fees to pay. You can't mix the spiritual with the material. Big book sponsorship is free, freely given, freely received. No axes to grind, no windy arguments or frothy debates. If your prospect is going to start having a windy argument with you or getting into a frothy debate, what's the one essential already out the window? Probably willingness, and probably honesty, and probably open-mindedness too. And they're back to being a waste of time. No people to please. There's a lot of ass kissing that goes on in the rooms, a lot of groveling. You know, I hear sponsors telling sponsees to go to meetings in their pajamas to signify willingness. I remember a sponsee called me up and said, you know, would you help me out? I'm so angry at my sponsor. I said, why? And she said, well, my sponsor told me in order to get well, I had to clean his house twice a week. Now, Dr. Bob did say clean house, but I don't think he meant it quite so literally, right? And I hear this stuff. You know, and these sponsors trying to be gods to their prospects. There's no groveling in this relationship. You know, you're not here to kiss my ass, nor am I here to kiss yours. Now, sometimes they're not necessarily newcomers, but I've met people in the rooms where they know about people like us that want to be helpful, but they have no desire to really get well. They're the mooches. They're always bumming cigarettes or a place to flop or a few bucks or what have you. They're always on the take. So we don't want to enable bad behavior either. So there's no ass kissing, no groveling, none of that goes on in our relationship between sponsor and prospect. And lastly, no lectures to be endured. You know, I see a lot of codependency between sponsor and sponsees. The Care Bear sponsor, oh, I'm going to love you till you love yourself. Hell, my own wife's love, my kids' love wouldn't sober me up. You think some dickweed I barely know in the room's going to get me sober because they say they love me? Like, come on. Or the bullying sponsor. Hey, shut up. Take the cotton out of your ears and shove it in your mouth and you do whatever I tell you to do or I'm going to fire your ass. As if that approach is ever going to work. And it's all codependent manipulation and enabling behavior. That's not what we're here to do. There's no lectures to be endured. You want what I have, I'll give it to you. I remember Mark Houston, who passed away, used to say, when you don't care, I can't. And when you do care, I must. And that's kind of the approach I have when it comes to working with others. I'm not here to lecture you or make sure you do your program or micromanage you or any of that stuff. You don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. But if you want to do it, man, I'll bend over backwards to help. These are the conditions we found most effective, and after such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. And that's what we all want to do, right? Walk out of here, free people, free individuals that we can be helpful to others. Now, if you don't want to stop, you don't want to stop drinking, using, or acting out, don't waste your time trying to persuade somebody. Remember, I love this phrase, don't be a spiritual nuisance. You ever met a spiritual nuisance in the room? Constantly telling you got to do this, you got to have God, you got to go God this, God that. Oh my God, it can be really off-putting. We don't want to be spiritual nuisances. You don't want to do the program, that's okay. You want to drink, use, or act out some more? Go knock yourself out. I'm not here to run your life. I don't want to spoil a later opportunity. What I do say is, hey, if you get into a lot of trouble or you find you need help, you give me a call. I'm right here. I'd be more than pleased to help. And I leave the door open. The more hopeless they feel, the better. I love this line. This isn't working with others. The more hopeless they feel, the better. They'll be more likely to follow your suggestions. That's why I do a log and loser list. I'm really trying to deconstruct who they think they are because it ain't working. So that they realize, oh my God, I am going to drink, use, or act out again. And that's going to put me on a losing streak to the gates of insanity or death. I want them at that bottom line so that they'll be more likely to follow the suggestions that we're offering, and I can show them a way out. We in our turn sought the same escape, sought the same recipe with the desperation of a drowning person, of a loser, the desperation of a loser. Again, desperation, no half measures. Based on your loser list, are you desperate? Ideally, that's a yes. Now, if you've decided you want what we have, what do we have? We have recovery. Do you want that? Yes or no? And are willing to go to any length, no half measures to get it? Hopefully that's a yes. Then you're ready to take certain steps. So ask the newcomer, do they want to quit for good? Not just one day at a time, but do you want to quit for good? And if that's a yes, would they go to any extreme, no half measures to do so? Now, the old timers used to ask this question, and the only answer they wanted to hear was, I'm willing to do anything. I'm not a big fan of that answer because it puts the sponsor in a tremendous position of power. And that's not necessarily a good thing because it can open things up for an abusive codependent relationship. So I thought, what does any extreme look like? So when I was doing these workshops, bricks and mortar, I would always ask the audience, what does any length look like to you? And I'd heard different answers. And then one person said to me, well, based on what you're telling us, Cameron, any length means to follow the instructions in the big book, to follow the recipe. And I thought, what a brilliant answer. So, and as I state right here, are you willing to thoroughly follow the instructions in the big book? Nothing more, nothing less. And hopefully that's a yes. And if they say yes, then their attention should be drawn to you as a person who has recovered. This is where we share with the newcomer what our life is like today. I'm going to do it very briefly with you. As a result of being shown out of this program, I drank and used morning, noon, and night from the age of 20 to 46. I'm 64, soon to be 65. I have done more in the last 18 years than I did in my first 46. In my 18 years of sobriety, I rebuilt a destroyed marriage. My wife and I are celebrating 32 years of marriage this year. My daughter, who's 35, we were estranged because I was violent as an alcoholic addict. She was here earlier tonight. She made this beautiful beef soup. Oh my God, with this garlic, horseradish, sour cream sauce to go with it. Oh my God, it was so good. And I have a really nice relationship with her. And I see her every Thursday for dinner. And we play cards and watch movies together and so forth. My son, who's 37, he has an 11-year-old autistic boy. So for me to be sober, to help him out with those difficulties and challenges, and that's a gift the 12-step program gives me day in and day out. My liver went back to normal. I had liver disease coming in the program. My liver returned to normal after 6 years. I went back to school in my 50s, graduated top of my class in medical anthropology and religions. And I've traveled all over the world speaking in groups like this when we were traveling. I've been to Spain, Sweden, England, all across America, Canada. And it's a stellar life being a recovered member of a fellowship. It's such a great life to lead. And this is what the program has given me over the last 18 years. So when therefore we were approached by other big book sponsors with whom the problem had been solved, who had recovered, there was nothing left for us to do but pick up the spiritual kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. Are you now ready to pick up your simple kit of spiritual tools? And hopefully that's a yes. How is it you can stay sober and I can't? Step 2. At the top of page step 2, you can write, power is uphill all the way and faith with works. You got to have faith that there's power there, but you got to do the work, and power is an uphill effort. So step 2 says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So came to believe, that infers we're going to go through a process. It's not an event. It's a process of working steps that awaken our minds to this thing called a power greater than ourselves. And it's got to be a great power. It's got to be better than the booze. It's got to be better than the drugs. It's got to be better than the acting out behavior. Because if it isn't better than that, I will go back to what I know has power, whether it be drugs, alcohol, sex, food, gambling, whatever. But I'm here to bear witness that this power is far greater than any of those items. It's been better than the alcohol, better than the drugs. And it's restored me to sanity. It really is quite amazing. Lack of power, that's my dilemma. That's why I'm here. I got no power. Once I got no power to stop, and once I start, I can't stop it. And if I'm ever in doubt of that notion, I look at my log and loser list. So we have to find a power by which we can live, and it has to be a power greater than ourselves, greater than the booze, the drugs, the acting out behavior, obviously. But where and how do we find the power? Where is this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself that will solve your problem. And hopefully that's all what you want to do. So what seemed at first a flimsy reed, that flimsy reed is the concept that a power greater than yourself is going to restore you to sanity. And that's saying, it sounds so flimsy. What, you're telling me a power greater than myself is going to restore me to sanity? When I got all these logs certainly seem much more substantive. So, you know, they got substance, they're big, they seem powerful, but they fail me. But this notion of a power greater than myself is going to work. That's the first tool that we offer up the newcomer, a power greater than ourselves, and it's that flimsy reed. But it is proven to be the loving and powerful hand of God. A new life, and hopefully that's what you all want, a new life, which has been given us, or if you prefer, a design for living, a recovery recipe that really works. And many of us bear witness to this power working in our lives because we're all like each other, but some of us don't do it anymore. In nearly all cases, the newcomer's ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. So where do we find this power? This is the other paradox of the program. I need a power greater than myself. Where do I find this power? Deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. That's a paradox. I got to find a power greater than myself, and where do I find it? Deep down within myself. Now, understanding what this notion of God is, and I get really snarky when people make stupid things their power, like a doorknob or a dog or a tree, or I work with a guy who made toilet paper his higher power because he used it daily. What a moron. How the hell is toilet paper going to keep you sober from crack cocaine or alcohol or fentanyl or sex or what have you? It drives me crazy what some people come up with. That great reality is deep down within inside. The closest I get to understanding God is that intuitive knowing. You know, you ever had an intuitive thought? It doesn't make sense to us because we access that knowledge outside. It transcends our five senses. But we get that gut feel, that spidey sense. You women understand intuition. I know when you're around certain people, men especially, your intuition kicks in. Whether or not you're around someone you can trust or be around, or someone who might be dangerous, and your spidey sense goes off, right? And that's that intuitive knowing. It doesn't make any sense, but if we listen to that gut feel, doesn't it in hindsight always say, God, I'm so glad I listened to myself, because it proved to be accurate. Just as conversely, where I didn't listen to myself, and then in hindsight, I thought, why the hell didn't I listen to that inner voice? That's the closest I get to understanding this God notion deep down within me. But it's a very subtle voice. It's a quiet voice. And that's why we offer up the tools of prayer, where we talk to God, we cue our mind to the divine reality within, and through meditation, we discern a course of action. And those are two other tools that we offer up in our program. But it can get obscured, as it goes on to say, it can get blocked by calamity, like our loser list, by our pomp, our egos, by worship of other things. The two biggest worships of other things I find in drugs and alcohol abuse is sex and money, or what I call money and honey. And those things distract the newcomer quicker than anything. Worship of other things, but in some form or other, it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and the miraculous demonstrations of this power in human lives are facts as old as humankind itself. We know there's a phenomenon going out there. Look at take the Judeo-Christian tradition. You got figures like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Rabbi Akiva, Jesus, the Apostle Paul, the disciples, Joan of Arc, Mother Teresa, Pope Paul, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and the list goes on and on and on, of men and women who claimed a connection to a power greater than themselves and did some really miraculous things in their lives. In other traditions, the Buddha found nirvana in his own lifetime through the Eightfold Path. Dalai Lama is a contemporary figure. Gandhi is a contemporary figure of Hinduism. Lao Tzu and Confucius with the Chinese tradition, and the list goes on and on and on, of men and women who were able to access a power far greater than themselves. So we know there's something at play. The question is how do we get a piece of the action, right? So, and this is what Bill is positing in this statement here. So he goes on to say that we finally saw that faith in some kind of God was part of our makeup, just as much as we have a feeling for a friend. So we know it's a feel-good experience deep down within. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, no half measures, but it was there. It was a fact. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that it can be found. So when we're looking for this notion of a divine consciousness, a God, a power greater than self, it's deep down within ourselves. And as I said, that's kind of the paradox. Now there are three things that come into play to get this step, to clear the ground to taking step two. The first one is if our testimony helps sweep away prejudice. You all think of someone you know in the program who's just like you, but claims a power greater than themselves restored them to sanity. Let their testimony bear witness to that power. Let their testimony bear witness to it. The second thing, the ability to be honest. And the third thing, to search diligently, no half measures, within yourself. You do those three things, you can take step two. And then if you wish, you can join us on this very broad, inclusive highway. And I hope you want to do that. And with this attitude, you cannot fail, which means you're all going to recover. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. You know, it says in the good book, it goes, seek and ye shall find, knock and it will answer, ask and ye shall receive. And I've found that spiritual dynamic to be quite accurate. And our program is all about implementing that dynamic in our lives. It goes on to say, some of us grow into it slowly, meaning it's a process, not an event. And it's come to all, including everyone here on the channel with us, it's come to all who have honestly sought it. And when we drew near to it, it discloses itself to us. And it discloses itself to us as we go through these steps. We awaken to it. We become aware of it. Most addicts, when they come into the rooms, are barely toilet-trained apes. They eat, they defecate, they fornicate, and that's about all they're good for. And that's okay. That's basic reptilian brain thinking. You know, it's the basic requirements of a species. But we got these massive brain lobes that if we employ them, we can transcend that fight, flight, freeze mentality and open our minds to a greater reality, a divine consciousness that lets us intuitively solve the most baffling situation. Now that's power. It goes on to say, with few exceptions, our members have found that they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource, which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. Now, I mess around with a lot of people's programs because a lot of people have bad programs, but I never, ever mess with their concept of God. I'm really messing with their sobriety when I do that. Now, I've worked with Jews, Christians, Sikhs, Muslims, Aboriginals, atheists, agnostics, Sufis. I don't care what name you want to put to it, as long as we're going to seek it deep down within. And I start with that, and through the process of prayer and meditation and inventories and being helpful to others, I know their minds are going to awaken to that inner reality, that inner power. And I have faith in that process, and I've seen that happen many times over the years. So the step 2 instruction, we needed to ask ourselves but one short question: do I now believe, or am I willing to believe in a power greater than myself, greater than the booze, greater than the drugs, greater than the acting out behavior? Are you willing to believe? Now, I prefer someone who's willing to believe as opposed to someone who just says, "Oh, I believe 100%." You know, and I have problems with that because already they've kind of got a preconceived notion of what that power is, and it can block them from experiencing maybe a greater awareness of the power. So I much prefer someone who's willing to believe than someone who's adamantly, "Oh, I believe." I sometimes tease the Christians because they just, "Oh, I believe, I've always believed." And then when they relapse, I always say, "Where's your Messiah now?" Which irritates the hell out of them. But as soon as a person can say that they do believe or are willing to believe, we emphatically assure them that they are on their way, which means if you can say that you're willing to believe, you have now just taken step 2 and you are on your way. And this has been repeatedly proven among us, and upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderful, effective spiritual structure can be built. So I got 3 stories I want to tell you at the end of step 2. There's a fish story, a dog story, and what I call the Michelangelo story. And it's all about waking up. So the fish story, couple of fish are hanging out in the ocean, and a third fish swims by and goes, "Hey, ain't the water great?" and swims off. And the one fish says to the other fish, "Water? What's water?" The other fish says, "I don't know. I've never heard of water." So well, let's go find out what this water is. So they start swimming the 7 seas, asking everyone they encountered, "Do you know what water is?" "No, I've never heard of water." "Do you know what water is?" "No, what's water?" No one knew what water was. Yet here they are swimming in it. Why don't they know what the water is? Because they're asleep. They're unconscious. Most humans are born unconscious. They grow up asleep, never, and live out their entire lives, having families and careers, never awakening to the great reality deep down within. But what's great about a 12-step program, it is a conscious awakening experience. As we work our steps, our minds awaken to this inner reality, this divine consciousness, this power greater than ourselves, and we light up with that. And that's the journey that we're about to embark upon. The dog story is a variation of this. A guy goes hunting with his dog. He's duck hunting. He takes his buddy with him, and he shoots a duck, and it drops in the middle of the pond. Well, the dog gets up, walks across the water, picks up the duck, brings it back, and his buddy doesn't say anything. Shoots another duck, drops in the middle of the pond. The dog gets up, walks across the water, picks up the duck, brings it back. He still doesn't say anything. So he turns to his friend and he says, "Hey, do you see anything wrong with my dog?" And the guy goes, "Yeah, That dog can't swim, missing the miracle of a dog walking on water. Now, when you come into most addicts, when they come into the rooms, they're oblivious. They don't see folks like us. And this is why our stories are important to share. They don't realize that we are people who have found a power greater than ourselves, which restores the sanity, and we don't do it anymore. That's the dog walking on water. If you're an addict and you're not acting out anymore or using or drinking, that's the dog walking on water. And that's why we bear witness to this power in the rooms. So people can say, hey, I'm like you, you're like me, you don't do it anymore. What's this power? I need this power too. The last story is the Michelangelo story. You've all seen the classic picture. I'm going to call it up on the screen. You got God up in the clouds here, reaching down to touch Adam, who's represented here on earth. Now look at God, his arms stretched out. It's taut. He's trying to touch humankind. Humankind depicted by Adam, his arms kind of lackadaisically hung out, his wrist is limp, his finger is, limp. And what Michelangelo is trying to depict is the sloth of humankind. M. Scott Peck, an American Christian psychiatrist, he wrote the book, The Road Less Traveled. He believes the original sin is sloth, laziness. We're too lazy to stay in conscious contact with God. And that's what cast us out of paradise. That's what separated us from the divine. But again, our program is it's a program of faith with works. It's a program of into action. And if you look at this picture, the distance between God's finger and man's finger is but an inch. And what Michelangelo is depicting here is that the great reality is very close. The divine is very close at hand. And by implementing a program of faith with works and putting our program into action, we straighten out and we have a direct experience with the divine itself. Or what I like to romantically tell my newcomers is together, arm in arm, because I'm seeking the same power you're seeking right now. And that's why I co-sponsor. I do my steps, you do your steps, and together we go look for this power. And what I romantically like to say is together we're off to touch the face of God. And that's a hell of an experience when it occurs. And some of you that have worked with others, I know have had that experience. And that's the experience you don't want to miss. And it's a huge bright spot in my life when it happens. So that's the Michelangelo story. Those are my 3 stories at the end of step 2. I hope you liked them. Step 3, I'm going to go through step 3. I'm going to set it up. I'm going to give you a homework assignment to think about. So step 3 says, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand it. Now, we know in step 1, I got no power. I'm going to drink, use, or act out again. And for me to drink, use, or act out again is going to put me on a trajectory to insanity or death. And I don't want that. And I realize there are certain essentials that need to be in place. I need to be willing, honest, and open-minded. And I meet people in the rooms who are just like me, but don't do it anymore. And they say, there's a power greater than ourselves out there that we can tap into. Well, where do I find this power? And I learn in step 2 that there is power, and I learn where to find the great reality deep down within. So in step 3, I'm basically saying, if I could show you where that power is, would you go to it? Would you commune with it? Would you listen to it and obey the direction you get? So what does it mean? What do we do? Well, we made a decision to turn our will. That is our thinking. I'm going to turn my thinking over to the care of God. Why? Because who's running my brain when I'm untreated? The liar. And the liar always wins the argument. That's why slogans like remember when, think, play the tape all the way through doesn't work for us when we're untreated, because the liar is so strong, it will win the argument. When do we always remember when? After the fact. So we want to turn our thinking over to a new source of thought. And our lives is our actions, our behaviors. We're going to implement a new kind of behavior in our life to the care of God as we understand it. So we claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the addict, and if you want to see an apt description, just refer back to your log and loser list. Our personal adventures before and after. What adventures before and after what? Before the first drink, the first drug, the first thought or act, and our adventures after the first drink, first drug, first thought or act. Make clear 3 pertinent ideas. These are known as the ABCs of our program. A, that we were addicts and could not manage our own lives. Based on your loser list, is this you? Yes or no? B, that probably no human power could have relieved our addiction. Based on your log list, are you beyond human aid? And C, that God could and would if it were sought. Are you willing to believe? Yes or no? And being convinced of A, B, and C, and ideally you've just circled yes 3 times, we're at step 3, which is we decided we turn our will, that is our thinking, and our lives, our actions over to God as we understand it. What do we mean by this? What do we do? Well, the first requirement is we be convinced that any life, including all of us here, run on self-will can hardly be a success. And again, referring back to the log and loser list, based on your log and loser list, are you convinced your life run on self-will is hardly a success? And I ran my life into the ground when I came into these rooms. It was a complete, utter disaster. I was bankrupt physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. So we're positing a notion here, who's responsible? Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate because everyone's playing the same game. And sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation. But I invariably find that at some time in the past, I'm making decisions based on me, based on my selfish, self-centered attitude that place me in a position to be hurt. And we can all think of numerous examples where we've made decisions based on self that later we pay the price for. So our troubles are basically of our own making. Between those 2 paragraphs, you can write this note. I am responsible for my illness and my recovery. I am responsible for my illness and my recovery. That's what Bill's saying. We're responsible for it, and we're responsible for our solution too. And again, being responsible is a principle of power. Irresponsibility has no power. I just play the victim. So our troubles are basically, we think of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the addict is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though they usually do not think so. I like to blame others. I also like to run the show. I'd tell my wife, I'm the planet, you're the moon, you revolve around me. That did not go over well. Above everything, we addicts must be rid of the selfish. We must, or it kills us. You can make a note here. The liar is out to kill me. The liar wants me to drink. It wants me to use. It wants me to act out again. And to do so puts me on a trajectory to the gates of insanity or death. The liar's out to kill me. Now, God makes this possible. Now, why do we need God? Because cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, behavioral modification doesn't seem to work for us. We need a spiritual intervention. We need a divine reality that's greater than everything to restore us to sanity. So God makes this possible. And there often seems no way of getting rid of self without its aid. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions. I had lots of them, but they never kept me sober because they're just logs. And I could not live up to them even though I would have liked to. And neither could I reduce my self-centeredness, much by wishing, there's another log, the wishing log, or on our own power, which means I'm a log. You know, I'm a log also. So we have to have God's help because, as I said, behavioral modification doesn't work for us. So top of page 11, this is the how and why of it. First, we have to quit playing God. It doesn't work for us. Would you agree with that? based on your own experience, would you agree? You running your life, you being in charge, self will run riot, hardly a success. Would you agree playing God doesn't work? Next, we decided hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. I love this statement. God's going to be my director, right? So basically, my board of directors had a meeting inside my head. They invited me in. They said, Cameron, as CEO of Cameron Inc., you are awful. You have broken the company. We're bankrupt physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. We're in the toilet. It's an absolute disaster. You're an awful director. Now we got a new director, calls himself God. He's omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent. We think he's the guy for the job. So Cameron, you're fired and God is hired. That's what we're doing in step 3. We're firing the liar and we're hiring God. And if you're willing to do that, you can circle yes and in the margin write, I'm fired, God's hired. That's the nut of step 3, firing the liar and hiring God. I love that. I fire the liar every morning as I commit to my step 3 proposition. Now it says God is the principal, we're its agent. See, I'm no longer in the Cameron business. I joined a new company, God Inc. And it says God Inc., God, principal. And then it's got Cameron, agent of God. I love that. Wouldn't that be a great way to go around the meeting rooms? Hi, my name is, here's my card, agent of God. I just think that's a great title. And that's really what we're signing up for. We're joining God Inc., and we are agents of God now. We're intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation. That sounds so much more powerful than, hi, I'm a hopeless addict. Thank God for you people. My cat died today and I felt like drinking, using, and acting out. And, oh my God. No, I'm an agent of God. I love that. What a great title. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of a new and triumphant arch of which we're going to pass on to freedom. See, we're constructing. Step 1, we have the foundation stone. I'm powerless. My life is unmanageable. Step 2, we have that cornerstone. And then we're building that arch, that proverbial mystical doorway with that keystone of step 3, where we make a decision. We're going God's way, and we're creating a passageway to this spirit world. And when we sincerely took this position, the position being God's business, not my business, remarkable things followed. We have a new employer. Being all powerful, it provided what we needed if we keep close to this power, and we do that through working steps, and performed its work well. Established on such a footing, God's business, not mine, we become less interested in ourselves, our own little plans and designs. More and more, I become interested in seeing what I can contribute to life. Have you ever noticed with addicts, untreated, they have very low self-esteem? Why? Because they're always taking, snatching everything they can get out of the show. When I came into the program and started working it, my attitude changed from one of taking to one of giving my value to be helpful to other people, and other people readily accepting that. And it had a very profound effect on my internal esteem. And it started to raise that esteem. And I've always noticed people of high self-esteem are always contributing. They're always giving things to others. It's like Zig Ziglar says, you can get everything you want in life just by helping others. It's the paradox of our program. By helping others get well, we get well ourselves, right? It's always in the equation of contribution rather than taking what we can get. And that's one of the things I look for when I'm working with someone. When I see their energy shift from taking to giving, I know the program's taking effect. It goes on to say, and here, how do you know you're having a spiritual experience? Now, that's an epistemological question. For those of you that I throw the vocabulary in as a bonus, epistemology is the branch of philosophy. It's the science of how do we know what we know. So what's the epistemology of a spiritual experience? Well, our big book accurately and aptly describes it. The first thing, as we felt new power flow in. If you're feeling new power flowing in, that you're having a spiritual experience. As we enjoyed peace of mind, those yap voices in my head have died down. I don't hear all that racket anymore. I'm actually peaceful and comfortable within my own company. As we discovered that we could face life successfully, regardless of what three-ring shit show I'm facing, I can face it successfully because I got a program of living without booze and drugs and acting out behavior that lets me deal with those matters in a proactive way. As we become conscious of its presence. How many of us want to be more conscious of that divine reality? As you wake up, you begin to see this fabric of the divine in everything, like the water and the fish. It's everywhere. It's just a question of waking up to it and there it is. And we start to see that amazing divine fabric running through the thread of everything that we do. It really is an extraordinary thing to raise consciousness in that respect. As we begin to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, hereafter, we were reborn. Now, I always use this statement, we were reborn. It's like we're about to enter spiritual boot camp. Now, the sense of who and what we are formed very early in our lives. And when we try and tear that apart, it's very destructive. In my day, when back in the 60s and 70s, we called it a nervous breakdown when people would literally, their sense of self no longer worked and there was a collapse. Brainwashing would be another example. These are destructive processes. There is a process, though, that has worked on a very narrow category, and that's the military. The military has developed a process called Bootcamp, where they can take a teenage boy and through a boot camp training, create a soldier. And it's been very effective, and it's the same process that's been used for several thousand years. This is kind of what we're about to go through. It's a kind of a spiritual boot camp, steps 4 to 9. And what we're doing is, in the first 3 propositions, is we're trying to, in a very positive, proactive way, deconstruct who we think we are. Because whoever I think I am at this point, it ain't working. So I'm going to tear down the structure. And then through this process of boot camp, I'm going to be reconstructed under a new set of spiritual principles and emerge reborn into a new way of living. That's essentially the dynamic we're about to embark upon, and starts with that commitment on step 3, that decision to go a different way. A lot of people seem to think that 12 steps is about quitting drinking, using, or acting out. But if you understand your step 1 proposition, we can't quit. We will drink, we will use, we will act out again, yet many of us don't do it. Why? Because we made a decision to go a different way. I'm going to do it God's way. Instead of being dishonest and selfish and resentful and fearful, just for today, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be pure. I'm going to be unselfish and loving in all my affairs, with my family, when I'm at work, when I'm in the rooms, when I'm in public. And in applying those spiritual principles, my job description, which we'll clarify in steps 4 and 5, these principles allow me to access a power far greater than myself deep down within me that lets me easily control that desire to drink, use, or act out. That's what they really mean for just for today. I'm doing it God's way, not my way. It's not about just for today, I'm not going to drink, use, or act out, because that's an untenable position. Instead, I'm going to do it God's way. And by doing so, I access a power far greater than myself. Now, it does say we thought well before taking the step, making sure that we were ready. No half measures here, folks. That we can at last abandon ourselves utterly. That means no half measures again, to God. Is that what you're willing to do? Do you really want to do that? Now, you can make a note here. I call step 3 because I do step 1 and 2. I know my step 1 and 2. I don't have to recommit all the time unless I'm being doubtful, and then I refer to my log and loser list. But step 3 is the decision I take every morning. I call it my daily baptism in the program, where I commit to going God's way today. And, the instruction is every morning, are you willing to do this? Are you willing to sit down and through the process of prayer, and I'll go over the prayer in a minute with you, where we cue our mind to that divine reality deep down within. And then in meditation, I meditate, what's my day going to be like when what was my day with my family, my children, when I'm at work, when I'm in a room? What will my day look like doing God's will? And I build a picture, and then I execute my day. That's the decision we're about to make, to do this every morning. And the prayer that we're giving, where we're at step 3, is, many of us said to our makers, we understand it, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I might better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, thy way of life. May I do thy will always. And then we meditate on what God's will is for us today. Now, I'm going to wrap up with the appendix 3 chart about steps 3 to 9. But before we do that, I just want to do a short step 3 prayer and meditation with you right now, just to give us some practice. And then I want you to think about over the next 24 hours before we meet tomorrow, what does it really mean to you to go God's way as opposed to your way? Are you really ready to do that? Are you really ready, with no half measures, to surrender who you were and be reconstructed under a new direction in life? And the step 3 prayer is just a nice little prayer to illustrate that. So if you want to sit in an open body position and straighten your spine, this is just a 2.5 minute meditation.
If circumstances warrant, we ask our wives or friends to join us in morning meditation. But it is better to meet God alone than with one who might misunderstand. On awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, we can employ our mental faculties with assurance. For after all, God gave us brains to use. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. God, I offer myself to Thee, to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do thy will always.
Okay. It's a great little step 3 prayer, and if you like it, just drop me an email and I'll fire one off to you. Last concept before we close this session off, and as I finish with this concept, I'll have Gloria come back in and just explain when we're going to meet again, and we'll see you all again tomorrow. So, on page 32 of your workbook, I have this concept laid out. And this is literally steps. Oh, sorry about that. This is literally steps 3 to 9 laid out. So we have the step 3 decision here, right? Now, the way all human beings work, this is basic Psych 101. As we think, thus we feel, thus we behave, thus we become. Now, if you want to change who you are, you got to change your actions and behaviors. To change your actions and behaviors, you got to change the way you feel about things. And to change your feelings, you got to change the way you think. Now, most people think with self-will, and we get caught up into what's called the bondage of self, where it's me in the middle and me, all around me. That's the way I lived a lot of my life. My thinking, when I'm coming from self, is always driven by fear. And what am I fearful of? I'm always afraid of losing what I have or not getting what I want. So how does that make me feel about life? Well, I feel hurt or threatened most of the time. And what's being hurt or threatened? My self-esteem, my money situation, my security, my ambitions, my relationships, my sex. So how do I behave? Well, I get dishonest and resentful and angry and selfish and self-seeking. I get arrogant or self-deprecating, jealous, suspicious, envy, greedy, lustful, slothful, irresponsible, impatient, and we could add a lot more character defects to that list. And what we're going to try and uncover is a process in step 4 and 5 of how do we figure out what our moral inventory is. Because remember, a 12-step program is a spiritual moral approach to the efficacy of addiction. And as a result of behaving this way, what do I become? I become a man who harms others, I harm myself, and I drink, use, or act out. This model is no power and lack of power. That's my dilemma. So instead, we go a different way. In God's will, where I surrender to God's direction, where I plug into the great reality deep down within, a much different equation occurs. God speaks through you. You all showed up today. That's God speaking through you to me saying, Cameron, get off your lazy ass and carry a message. And ideally, I connect back to the God. And as God speaks through me, he connects to you. And then you ideally connect back to God. You see, God created us so he could have a conversation with himself. That's a Sufi paradox. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Sufis, that's a mystical Islamic sect of called the Sufis, where they believe God dwells within. He created us to have a conversation with himself. I love that paradox. When I'm plugged into that spiritual energy, what my thinking is driven by a love. Now, some say the absence of God is fear and the presence of God is love. And by love, the Greeks broke love into 3 categories. The eros love, that's the erotic physical love. There's the philia, the brotherly sisterly love, or the Bible calls biblical love. But the highest form of love they called agape love, unconditional spiritual love. That's a position of neutrality, safe and protected, where I practice, the Buddhists said it quite nicely, where they practice loving detachment. I love being in that zone. I'm much more proactive in my life rather than reacting to everything like a billiard ball bouncing off the rails and other balls. How does this make me feel? Physically, I'm relaxed. Emotionally, I'm calm. Mentally, I'm serene. Spiritually, I'm centered. And because I have nothing to lose in this power I've connected to, I become honest, forgiving, unselfish, helpful, humble, trusting, content, generous, intimate, active, responsible, patient. And we could add a lot more spiritual principles to this list. And not only are these spiritual step 9 approaches to making amends and reparation, but they become principles by which I live day to day. And what do I become as a result of this approach? I become of maximum usefulness to God and my fellows. I make spiritual progress, and I recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And I hope this is helpful. I love it. It's a nice, clear example of steps 3 to 9. This is the boot camp, the spiritual boot camp that we're about to embark upon. And I hope that I've set up enough, at this point, that you'll all return tomorrow and we'll complete the process with steps 4 through 12. And then I'm going to cut you loose on your fellowships and you can go do the business of sponsorship. I'm going to turn it back over to Gloria for some closing thoughts. And Gloria?
Yeah. Thanks so much, Cameron. It's been really great for me, and I hope it's really been helpful to everybody else as well. And same time again tomorrow. So awesome. Thank you. Oh, yeah, same time tomorrow.
Everybody's got that. We'll be on the same link tomorrow at 7 in the evening, my time, but I think it's 7 in the morning your time. Is that right, Gloria?
It's 7 a.m. in Malaysia and 10 a.m. in Australia, and 9:30 for South Australians. And I don't know about the US, but yeah, you just said.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for showing up. You know, it lets me take out insurance against my slips, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Cameron, one thing, we had a question from Vishnu on step 2. So would you like to take that question right now?
What was the question?
Vishnu, did you want to come through and ask? Absolutely.
Thank you. So Cameron, earlier you said, right, that the sponsor just helps the sponsee connect with God and God connect with sponsee. Personally, I had a difficulty when people, when I came into the program, everyone was just saying, oh, you got to connect with your higher power, find your higher power. But nobody really told me how exactly I could connect with my higher power. And I did see some answers there, like meditate. And I don't know, but for me, when I tried that, it made me so frustrated. Just meditating just made me so angry. I'm like finding something in my head that I can't find. Like, as it is, my head is already a mess, and now you want me to find this. And it took me a really long time until I don't know, I found a higher power. But until then, I felt like I was lagging. And so how can I help a sponsee in that situation?
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a good question, because when I started meditating for the first time, like yourself, there was such a racket in my head of resentments and fears and guilt and shame. And I'm thinking, how can I find this divine reality when I got all this racket in my head? And that's why we do inventories in step 4 and 5, when I start to look at my part and resentments and harms to others, and I begin to target what character defects are blocking me from connecting to this divine reality. Like, one of my biggest defects is hatred, and it blocks me from having any kind of divine experience. So through the inventory process, and by sharing that inventory with somebody, and then getting right with God in step 6 and 7, and applying forgiveness in the reparations of my past, I forge a path to that divine reality, and I start to experience some of those benchmarks where I feel a new power flow in. I sense a greater reality. My mind is clear. My energy is calmer, and I begin to grow in an understanding of what this notion of a higher power is. And it's also a very personal experience too. I try to articulate it to people through words, but it's really a direct experience. It's like explaining sex to a virgin. I can give you all the diagrams and show you videos of what people do, but until you're in the saddle actually doing it, it's pretty much an intellectual endeavor, right? So we got to have an experience with it. Well, more will be revealed tomorrow. I meet people who have gone down the rabbit hole just as far as I've gone, and they don't do it anymore. And that presents a very compelling picture. And I realize that there is a power out there that some people seem to be able to connect to. And so in step 2, I come to believe in this power because I see it bear witness in other people in the rooms. And I go, you're like me, I'm like you, and I want what you got. Show me how to work it. And then I make that decision in step 3, where I'm going to fire that liar, that twist of thinking in my head. I'm going to take on a divine consciousness instead. And I'm going to go a different way in life. I'm going to go God's way. I'm not going my way anymore. And I get reborn into a new way of living. And that's a pretty profound decision to make. I sometimes hear in the rooms, oh, don't make any major decisions for the first year. Well, when you think about it, every one of our 12 steps is a major decision. Step 1, I'm powerless, I'm unmanageable. Step 2, willing to believe in a higher power. Step 3, I'm going to fire myself and turn my life over to God as I understand it. Like, those are 3 big major decisions that we make in our program. So I'm assuming that because you've come back, that those of you who were here yesterday made the decision you want to go this way. And we're just going to reaffirm that commitment with a brief meditation, and then we'll launch into the step 4 presentation. So if you want to sit in an open body position, straighten your spine, open your hands to receive, and we'll take a short, just a short 3-minute step 3 affirmative prayer.
If circumstances warrant, we ask our wives or friends to join us in morning meditation. But it is better to meet God alone than with one who might misunderstand. On awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, we can employ our mental faculties with assurance. For after all, God gave us brains to use. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. God, I offer myself to Thee, to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always.
Well, welcome back, everybody. Once again, I'm Cameron. I'm a member of Cocaine Anonymous and your facilitator on the 12 steps in 4 hours. It only takes a day to learn it and the rest of your life to practice it. For those of you that have been working with others and have an approach of sponsorship, think of this presentation as another tool to add to your toolkit. I kind of think of it like soul surgery, triage work, because sometimes we work with people that are really in crisis, and unless they find a power greater than themselves, chances are they're going to relapse. So we have an opportunity to kind of delve into an expedient process that lets them have a sort of a lick of the ice cream cone of what the God dope is really all about, this spiritual energy, this spiritual dope, and give them a fighting chance. So having done step 3, having affirmed the decision that, yes, I'm going to go God's way, I'm not doing it my way anymore. I'm going to hire a divine consciousness and fire that liar that lives in my head that's trying to constantly convince me to go back out. And the first time I ever tried to meditate with this higher power, there was such a cacophony of noise in my head, all those yap voices going off with guilt and shame over the harms I've done, and fears and resentments. And I realized that the divine reality is somewhere in there, but I can't seem to connect to it. So I need to do an inventory to remove the blocks, to remove the impediments that block me from having a two-way relationship with the one who has all the power. And this is what step 4 and 5 is all about. And it's a process where we get right with ourselves. So as it says at the top of page 12, step 4 made a searching and fearless, there's that no half measures again, a searching and fearless moral inventory. A lot of people turn step 4 into a psychological approach, and that's not what it's about. A 12-step program is a spiritual moral approach to addiction, and what we're doing in our inventory process is uncovering our moral defects, our moral shortcomings. And in this process, we get right with ourselves. So as soon as we've taken our prospect through that all-important step 3 prayer and affirmation that, yes, I'm going this way, that decision, it says, next we launched out on a course of vigorous action. Now, some people try and tell you this means easy does it, but that's not the way I interpret those words. A course of vigorous action, no half measures. The first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us have never attempted. And though our decision, the one we just made in step 3, it's a vital and crucial step, it's not going to have a permanent effect unless I unblock myself, unless I face and get rid of the things that block me from having this two-way relationship with the one who has all the power. And it requires a strenuous effort. Once again, no half measures. Our liquor, our drugs, our obsessive compulsive behavior, these are symptoms of something deeper down. And so we're going to try and figure out what our causes and conditions are. So we start upon a personal inventory. This is our step 4. We take stock of ourselves honestly. Remember the 3 essentials: honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. First, we search out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure, and being convinced of self manifested in various ways is what it defeated us. We consider its common manifestations. And we look at 3 manifestations. We look at resentments, we look at our fears, and we look at our harms done to others. And in that process, we're going to tease out what our specific set of character defects, shortcomings may be. Now, the first thing we look at in the workbook is resentment. And resentment is the number 1 offender. Now, I want to share with you, it's on page 32 of your workbook. Let me just find my workbook here. And it's a great way of understanding resentment. And for those of you that suffer from codependency in Al-Anon and Coda, and I certainly see codependency a lot in the rooms in general in terms of how some people work with their sponsees, I find this matrix very useful. So we know from step 3 that Bill kind of posits the notion that we are responsible. Our troubles are basically of our own making. We make decisions based on self that later place us in a position to hurt. Our troubles arise from ourselves. So what is he's putting forth that we are responsible for our illness, responsible for our recovery. So what does a responsible person look like? Well, they're accountable. They're proactive, they're centered, they're leaders, they're functional, they're loving, they're independent, interdependent. And how do we get to that point? Well, I am responsible for myself. When you think about your thoughts, your feelings, your behavior, who's ultimately responsible? You come to the conclusion it's us, right? And as we know, it's our thought life that affects our feelings and our emotional life, which then in turn affects our actions and behaviors, and thus we become. So when I take full responsibility of my thought life and my feelings and my emotions, my behaviors, and that's easier said than done, but it is a very powerful position to hold when you're in full cognizant control of your own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Then we can be responsible to others, to be an effective sponsor, a mentor, a leader, a teacher, a parent, a spouse, employer, friend, partner, trusted servant. Unfortunately, that's not the way most people play the game, and I don't play the game like this all the time myself. And I find myself where I'm being irresponsible. And what does that look like? Well, I'm unaccountable, I'm reactive, I'm uncentered, I play the victim, I'm dysfunctional, I'm fearful, I'm codependent. I love the codependent battle cry. I need you to change how you think, feel, and behave towards me in order for me to feel okay about myself. That's an awful position to hold in dealing with the world around me. When I am irresponsible for myself, I give up my power over my thought life, and I blame you. I give my power over to you, and I blame others for the way I think, feel, and behave. You made me think that. You hurt my feelings. You embarrassed me. You caused me to do that. And I give all my power and responsibility to you. And because that is such a rotten place to be, then I try and take responsibility for your thoughts, your feelings and behaviors. And I try and change you through strategies of people pleasing, enabling, protecting, micromanaging, manipulation, over controlling, bullying, martyring behaviors. And those, again, who suffer in codependence and coda can certainly resonate with those particular strategies. I always know when I'm embodying the character defect of irresponsibility, because when I'm irresponsible either for myself or to others, resentment is always the result. So if you got a resentment, you know it's tied to the character defect of irresponsibility. And if you can wrap your head around that matrix, it's a great way of teasing out why I'm angry at something. So either somebody's doing things to me that I don't want, or someone's doing stuff that I don't want them to do, and I get annoyed with it, and I try and change them. And of course, we're all playing the same game, and it's like war out there, and the end result's always resentment. And as it goes on to say on page 12, it destroys more addicts than anything else, and from it stems all forms of spiritual disease. Now, in the big book, they refer to these spiritual disease as causes and conditions, defects of character, shortcomings, flaws in our makeup, the root of our troubles. And I went through the 164 pages of the big book, and I looked for every shortcoming Bill referenced. And this is a list of the words he used to describe some of the character flaws that he had and people that he knew in the original 100 had. And it's a pretty good list. Some of them are a little antiquated now, but it's a good start. I'm not going to go through them. At some point, you might want to go through the list, check off the ones that you seem to have. And it goes on to say, for we've not only been mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. Would you agree with that? And if so, circle yes. Now, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. There is a lot going on in that sentence. We know from our experience that our addiction has a physical component to it. And when we separate ourselves from that physical craving, where we don't act out for a while, or we don't drink, or we don't use, we get separated from that physical allergy. But we know it goes deeper than our bodies, because our minds trick us into either picking up or going or acting out again. But we know it goes deeper than our minds, otherwise the psychiatrists and the therapists and the counselors would have resolved our issues long ago. So we know it goes deeper than our minds. And what Bill is saying in the big book is we suffer a spiritual malady, a spiritual disease, which he calls this selfishness, self-centered behavior, where I try to arrange life to suit me. And of course, everyone else is doing the same thing. So the show never comes off the way I want. So as a result of being so selfish and self-centered, I suffer its symptoms, and I get restless, irritable, discontented, bored, depressed. That activates the liar. The liar comes out of remission and says, hey, we need a solution. And we go back to the old solution and we succumb to desire again. And once we pick up or start acting out, we're back on another physical spree. So what Bill is saying is that if we overcome the spiritual malady, we overcome the selfish self-centeredness and practice a life of being unselfish and being helpful to others, I will not suffer the symptoms of that malady. I don't get restless. I don't get irritable. I don't get discontented. I don't get bored. The liar stays in remission and my mind and body straightens out. That's the key. And there's a lot going on in that one sentence. It's a great sentence. In dealing with our resentments, we're going to put them on paper. We want to get them out of our head and put pen to paper. And when we put pen to paper, we're going to break it down into 5 columns of work. So the first column is we list the people, the institutions, or the principles with whom we're angry. Who am I angry at? What am I angry at? Is it a person? Is it an institution? Is it a particular principle? That's column 1. Then I ask myself, why am I angry? And this is column 2. What are all the reasons I'm angry at this person, this institution, or principle? Then, in most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So I'm being injured in some way. And it goes on to say that we get sore, we get burned up. So on our grudge list, we're going to name our injuries. What was injured? Was it my self-esteem? Was it my security? Was it my ambitions? Was it my personal or sex relations, which had been interfered with? And we get this down on paper and we go back through our lives. Nothing counts but thoroughness, no half measures, and honesty. And when we're finished, we considered it carefully. So I'll go through an example in a minute. Now, the first 3 columns are pretty straightforward. But then we move to the 4th column at the top of page 13. It says, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done. So those first 3 columns I'm putting to the side. I resolutely look for my mistakes. I'm looking for my own mistakes, because when I blame others, there's 2 ways you can approach life. I'm going to be happy when you change. And how long have we played that game and waited? Or what am I prepared to do differently in relation to you, where I take power back? So I resolutely look for my own mistakes. Where had I been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, or frightened? Though the situation had not been entirely my fault, I disregard the other person entirely, no half measures. Where am I to blame? Because when we're responsible for ourselves, the only person I can be responsible for is me, my thoughts, my feelings, my behaviors. So where am I to blame? The inventory is mine, not the other person's. And when I see my faults, I list them and I put them before me in black and white. I get them out of my head, I put them on paper, and I admit my wrongs honestly, and I'm willing to set matters straight. So what's that going to look like? So I'm going to share the screen with you and pop back to the workbook, and let's scoot up to page 14. Page 14. So Bill in the big book works out the first 3 columns, and I added column 4 and 5 to tease it forward. According to Wally Patton, who wrote the book Back to Basics, they always wrote down the first 3 columns, but when they sat down with the sponsor, the column 4 and 5 was an oral discussion. I like to put it on paper myself, and that's why I teased it out as a 5-column process. So Bill's angry at Brown. This is a resentment. If you look at the second row here, Bill's angry at Mr. Brown. So why is he angry at Brown? Well, he's had some attention to his wife, Lois. He told his wife, Lois, about his mistress, and Brown's after his job at the office. So there's 3 big reasons that Bill's angry at Brown. So how does that affect Bill? How does that injure Bill? Well, it's affecting his sex relations. both with his wife and his mistress, now that Brown has said, hey, Bill's having an affair. His self-esteem's got to be affected. Around Brown, it might go to arrogance, like, who are you to be messing in my marriage? And around Lois, he's got to feel like he's just, a heel because he's cheating on her. His ambitions domestically and business-wise are being threatened. His pocketbook, his money situation's being affected domestically and professionally. And his security domestically and professionally are being threatened. So what's Bill's part in this resentment? Well, he's cheating on his wife. If he wasn't cheating on his wife, he wouldn't be in the hot water that he's in right at the moment. He wouldn't be angry at Brown for doing things and saying things he didn't want him to say. So right off the hop, you get 3 character defects: dishonesty, infidelity, and lust. And then the false pride. Whenever self-esteem is threatened, it's always false pride. False pride goes one of 2 ways. I either exaggerate who I am and I get arrogant, or I diminish who I am and I get self-loathing. But it's all part of false pride. It's all half-truths and innuendos that distort the actual reality of who and what I am. I get selfish because it's all about Bill. It's self-seeking. His motive might be he wants more sex, he wants better sex, he wants different sex, he wants, we can only guess at what Bill's motive might have been. Jealousy and suspicion, irresponsibility because he blames Brown, and fear. And there's always a fear that drives the character defect. Now, it could be a fear of no sex, it could be another fear, like he's a fear of getting divorced from Lois, or a fear of losing his job. Again, we can only guess, being Bill's inventory. So what should Bill do instead? How can he set matters straight? Well, the way out of anger and resentment is love and forgiveness. And I should update this workbook and add acceptance. I always find the trajectory is acceptance, then forgiveness, and then love. Honesty, faithfulness, intimacy, humility, to know oneself, to know your strengths, to know your weaknesses. That's humility. Unselfishness, helpfulness to others, trust, be responsible, faith in God, and courage to be the man he's meant to be under God's domain. Now, that's a really specific inventory on one line item. And look at how many character defects we're able to tease out just by one resentment. Now, I'll share a resentment with you right now. This is a resentment towards principles. And the principle that I got resentful about, especially over these last 2 years, and I've done a number of inventories on this, is I got resentful towards political correctness, woke culture, and critical race theory. Now, why am I angry about those things? Because I think it's racist. I think it's bigoted. I think it's hypocritical. I think it's bullying, unfair, unjust. It assaults the conceptual faculties of the human mind, the human reasoning. It's greedy. It's unintelligent. It's doublespeak, in my opinion. It's anti-life and it's evil. And that's my resentful reaction to those 3 principles. Now, how does that threaten me? What does it injure in me? Well, it injures my self-esteem. I begin to think that maybe I'm not right, or there's something wrong with me because I think a little differently about things, or I get arrogant and I think the other side is stupid. It affects my security. I get unsure of what's happening in the world. Well, is there going to be a world for me to exist in? It affects my ambitions. There are certain people I'd like to see and certain things I want to do that are being curtailed by these principles. It affects my pocketbook. I could get arrested. I might have to hire a lawyer. It costs me money in terms of, governments implementing these strategies and increasing taxes. It affects my relationships. There's certain people I like to see and to associate with, and, it could affect my relationships. And even with some of the stuff that's coming out, it could even affect my sexuality. So what's my part in this resentment? Because the only thing I can take charge of is me. So where am I at fault? Where am I to blame? What are my mistakes? What are my causes and conditions? So the first thing I try and tease out on my resentment is where I'm being selfish and self-seeking. So it's obviously selfish because it's all about me. But what's my self-seeking motive that binds me to this anger? What keeps my hands around their throats? That's what I want to figure out. So for me, what I'm expecting from society as a whole is I expect that I should have full autonomy, that I should have freedom of association, and I should be free to say and think whatever I want to say and think, to be a sovereign individual. That's not the way societies are working today. It's not the way cultures are working. And it's pretty intense out there. And as long as I hold on to those self-seeking motives, and the government's not changing, whether at the municipal, provincial, or federal levels, the world at hand is not really changing in the direction I want. So I remain resentful, holding on to that self-seeking motive. And that's dangerous for me, because then I suffer the symptoms. I get restless, irritable, discontented, bored, depressed. And then my liar comes out of remission and says, hey, Cameron, you need a bourbon. And then real trouble starts. So I got to see the futility and the fatality and the destructiveness for holding on to those self-seeking motives. Then I look at what fear is underlying this, what's driving it. And for me, it was the fear of authority, the fear of having no control over my life, the fear of my freedom being eroded, and the fear of there's a threat to my life. Now, what character defects pop up as a result of this resentment? I get arrogant. They're idiots. I get hateful. And out of my hatred comes immoral thinking of what I'd like to do with these, individuals that support these principles. And then my mind is full of suspicion and distrust. I get slanderous. I get gossiping. I get dishonest with myself, with God, with others. Here's how I handle the fear of authority. I practice civil disobedience. And in my mind, I think, well, when the government's, I'm going to practice civil disobedience, that'll keep the government away from me. That's kind of a futile thought, right? It just brings them right to my door. Non-compliance. And that brings up a character defect where I lead with the chin. If there's any boxers in the room, if you have your chin up in the boxing ring, you're going to get clocked and you're going to get knocked out. So you keep your chin down. I can really metaphorically lead with my chin by doing stupid things like non-compliance and civil disobedience, expecting the government's going to leave me alone. I get irresponsible. I blame the government. I blame these principles. I play the victim. I get codependent. I'll be happy when they change, and they're not going to change. I get intolerant. I get misanthropic. I begin to hate myself and everyone else. And that's a lousy place to dwell. So what should I do instead? I do inventory. In inventory, I discover humility. I understand who I am. I understand my strengths. I understand my weaknesses. I practice forgiveness and acceptance. If I can accept the fact that this is the way the world is right now, it might change, but right now, to accept this is the way things are going. And through acceptance, I can then move to a position of neutrality where I can be proactive rather than reactive, get to a place of forgiveness where I realize they, like myself, are sick too, and then eventually get to a point where I'm unconditionally loving, to have pure thoughts, to trust God. Trust God's got my back. Things are going to work out. To be proactive, to be honest, to be responsible, to be accountable, to have independence and interdependence in my life. How do I find freedom in an unfree world? That's a proactive line of thinking. To be compassionate, empathetic, to be helpful to others, to put my devotion to humanity, be devoted to humanity rather than hating it, and to think critically, to think strategically. I read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. What a profound influence that book had for me reading during the 2 years of COVID. That came out of my inventory, that wonderful book, and an insight on what I could do, You know, Viktor Frankl spent 6 years in Auschwitz facing the gas chamber every day, living on 8 ounces of bread a week. And he managed to survive it, come out whole and viable in that heinous situation, and become one of the leading psychiatrists of the world and developed logos therapy. Man, like that, it's a very inspirational book. If you've not read it, you should check it out. And to implement a regime of consistent daily prayer and meditation. And it really, really made a huge difference in my resentment around these principles. So that's how we handle resentment. Now, if you look on page 13, number 2, we reviewed our fears thoroughly. Now, we're going to approach fears the same way we approach our resentments. 5 columns. We put them down on paper, out of our head, write it down, pen to paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. We asked ourselves why we had them. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? I love doing fear inventories. That sounds so perverted. I love doing fear inventories because they reveal so much about myself. So here's an example. I have this fear of rejection. Now, fear of rejection is a self-esteem based fear. So why do I have this fear of rejection? Well, I'll call them 2. My parents were never there for me. My wife left me. It hurts me when people reject me. People don't seem to like me. So how does that threaten me? How does that injure me? It injures my self-esteem, my security, my ambitions, my money, my relationships, even sex. So what's my best thinking? How do I react? How do I respond to my fear of rejection? I get into false pride. I get into self-loathing. Oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not, something's wrong with me. Nobody likes me. And it's selfish. My self-seeking motives come into play to be the center of attention, to demand recognition and validation from others, to be irresponsible, to get into people-pleasing and martyring strategies. I get dishonest, I'm full of suspicion, and I have this tremendous fear of being alone. Now look at the man I've created in that 4th column. Do you want to be friends with someone like that? Do you want to have an intimate partner like that? Do you want to go into business with someone like that? I literally create a rejectionable individual. Viktor Frankl, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he calls it paradoxical intention, where I literally construct the very person and attract the very thing that I fear into my life. So our book gives us a way out. Instead of column 4, how can I set matters straight? I get humble. And here's the paradox too. When we do an inventory, we can't help but live in column 5. The very act of doing an inventory puts you into that 5th column. I get my humility by being honest with myself and looking at myself and taking responsibility and accountability for where I'm creating things. And I understand my strengths and my weaknesses. I get unselfish. I get helpful to others. And here's the thing, it's the weirdest thing. Whenever I tried to get validation, recognition, center of attention, it always slipped through my fingers. But when I took on what could I contribute to life and instead validate others, make others the center of attention, recognize other people, out of left field, God bestows all this validation, recognition. I got a reputation that kind of precedes me around the world these days. Not that I ever intended to be anything but a little minnow in a dirty puddle trying to be helpful to addicts, but all of a sudden I've got this global reputation. It's so upside down, it's so paradoxical. To become responsible and accountable, just the very act of doing inventory does that. To get congruent and honest, you have to be congruent. You have to be honest to do a column 5 inventory, and to have trust and to have faith in God and the courage to be the man I'm meant to be. And that's why I love doing inventories. It literally puts me into that 5th column of doing God's will. 3rd thing, on page 13, we reviewed our own conduct, all harms to others, including sex conduct, over the years past. Where had I been selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate? Whom had I hurt? Did I justifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, bitterness? Where am I at fault? What should I have done instead? And we get this all down on paper and we look at it. So very briefly, if we go back to our column work. Now, a harm inventory is a little different. Now, I always, let's take Bill's inventory with his wife that he's cheating on. So start with the 5th column. So what is Bill bringing to his marriage? False pride, lust, infidelity, dishonesty, selfishness, self-seeking, inconsideration, irresponsibility, and a fear of, let's say, no sex. Then work backwards. Instead of making column 3 about you, make it about the person you've harmed. Is he affecting, by bringing these character defects to his marriage, is he affecting Lois's self-esteem, Lois's sex relations, Lois's security, Lois's ambitions, and Lois's money situation? And as a result of having the affair, he unjustifiably arouses jealousy, resentment, distrust, and she felt inadequate. That's the harm done. And what I like about this approach is we see a clear trajectory of how our character defects affect others and what they unjustifiably arouse. So what should Bill do instead? Humility, intimacy, faithfulness, honesty, unselfishness, helpfulness to others, consideration, responsibility, faith, and courage. And by bringing this to his marriage, he's going to affect Lois' self-esteem, sex relations, security, ambitions, and money situation in a very positive way, and it's just might clean up everything that's going on in column 2. And thus we see a clear trajectory, a clear correlation between column 5 spiritual principles with reparations versus the correlation of character defects and the harm that we do to others. I love doing inventories. Remember, in step 2, we're coming to believe in a power greater than yourself. We're raising consciousness. We're becoming more cognizant of who and what we are. And inventory has a massive effect on raising the consciousness of who and what we are and our relationship with this higher power. I can't say enough about inventories. I remember my sponsor said to me at the end of the 12 steps, he said, Cameron, in addition to working with others and taking these principles in all your affairs, lots of 4s and 5s and lots of 8s and 9s. And I've been putting pen to paper for 18 years, and I can't say enough about it. Okay, step 4, instruction. If we've been thorough, no half measures, about our personal inventory, we've written down a lot. Now, that's a relative term. When I work with people, I go for the big resentments, the big harms, the big fears. Get a lot of inventory out of the big chunks. We've listed and analyzed our resentments, 5 columns. We've begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. Nothing good is happening in column 4. That's the bondage of self. Nothing good. There's no power there for me. I commence to see their terrible destructiveness. How do I see that? I see all these inventory items and all these destroyed relationships, and I realize how destructive they are. I've listed the people that I've hurt by my conduct, and I'm willing to straighten out the past if I can. If you've already made a decision, step 3, which is what we started this presentation off with, an inventory, step 4, of your grosser handicaps, that is the big defects, you've made a good beginning. That being so, you've swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. Now, note, it's not necessary for newcomers to talk about every resentment or selfish act or each person he or she has ever lied to or harmed for the inventory to be thorough. That's heresy in the rooms today. The objective is to get down to causes and conditions. Sometimes it takes only a few incidents to make clear which shortcomings have blocked the newcomer from an intimate two-way relationship with the one who has all the power. My biggest block to God is hatred. I saw hatred pop up so many times in my inventory, and I got a real clear connection with how vile and how futile and destructive that character defect is. So I worked very hard in my day on moving to a position of acceptance where I can find forgiveness and ultimately unconditional love for everything that is happening. I like the Buddhist perspective, to practice loving detachment throughout all my affairs. Step 5, admitted to God, ourselves, and another human being the exact nature, no half measures, the exact nature of our wrongs. Again, this is a process of getting right with ourselves. So having made our personal inventory, what are we going to do about it? We've written these columns, we got down to brass tacks in column 4, column 5. So what are we going to do about it? We're trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and discover what obstacles are in our path. We've admitted certain defects. As I shared with you, I admitted certain defects about myself. I've ascertained in a rough way what my trouble is. I put my finger on those weak items of my personal inventory. Now, quickly, these are about to be cast out. This requires action. Again, no half measures on our part, on my part. And when completed, will mean I've admitted to God, another human being, and ourselves the exact nature of these defects, which is the fourth column. And that brings us to the fifth step in our program of action, our recipe. Now, this is perhaps difficult sharing our defects with another person. I don't really enjoy sharing my defects with you. I'd rather have you all think I'm an intelligent agent spearhead of God's ever-advancing creation. However, if we skip this vital step, we may not overcome our drinking, our using, or our acting out. So we must be entirely honest, no half measures, with somebody, like a big book sponsor, if we want to live longer happily in this world. Rightly and naturally, we think well before we choose the person or persons with whom to take this intimate, confidential step. You don't want to be doing step 5 at meetings. I remember an individual sharing to a room that he had sex with a 13-year-old victim of the sex trade industry. Now, that did not go over well. The rooms are not spiritually fit. And the rooms ostracized this man over that confession, and he blew his brains out over it. The rooms are not safe. When we do an inventory, this is an intimate, confidential step. So we think well before, going off and who we choose to do this with. This, of course, this process requires confession and must have, of course, will want to go to the properly appointed authority whose duty it is to receive it. So I got to thinking about this properly appointed authority business. Now, it goes on to say in our instructions, such parts of our story we tell to someone who will understand yet be unaffected, someone who's spiritually fit. So I started thinking, who's the properly appointed authority for certain parts of our story? For criminal matters, it's a lawyer. Now, I worked with a woman who was doing armed robberies. She said, do you want me to go into the details? I said, absolutely not. That you'll take with a lawyer when you're doing your 8 and 9. But I will hear your moral inventory about your crimes in a general way, your greed, your bullying, your self-centeredness, your self-seeking. We'll talk about that in a general way, but the details of your crime go to the lawyer. Mental, emotional issues. I worked with a man who was raped as a 5-year-old boy. I remember him saying to me, I'm not really sure what my part in this is. And I go, you don't play a part, as an innocent, you don't play a part in this heinous crime. And he said, okay. And he says, do you want me to go into the details? I said, absolutely not. I am not skilled to have you go into a childhood trauma and try and psychologically reconstruct you into a whole or viable individual. That's what a therapist does. But I will speak to you as a 48-year-old man who's used a 43-year-old incident to justify a life of self-deprecation, victimization, self-centeredness, self-seeking. We'll talk about that in a general way. But the details of your childhood trauma, they go to the therapist. That's for their protection and your protection. Same thing with the lawyer. I've worked with people in organized crime. I don't want to hear any details. That puts my life at risk and my family's life at risk too, and their life. Medical issues. Nothing good comes out of telling your prospect to go off their lithium. Nothing good's going to come out from that advice. Now, I'm all in favor of getting off medications, but the properly appointed authority is your doctor. They understand your clinical situation. And you can express to them that you're trying to move in a certain direction and get their opinion. If you don't like their opinion, get a second medical opinion. But the medical doctor is the properly appointed authority. Financial matters, you're insolvent with credit card debt, or you're in large with the your country's revenue service. We have we have certain people that can help us navigate those financial vicissitudes, like tax lawyers and debt counselors and so forth, and they can help us arrange the best deal we can. We're on the same level as a moral matter as the priest or the rabbi or the spiritual advisor. We hear a moral inventory. That's our job as sponsors, and we're the properly appointed authority for moral matters. 2 things to watch out for when you're doing your step 5s or hearing step 5. Junky pride. Some people like to shock their sponsors and they bring out all sorts of heinous things. They don't need to do that. I don't need to know the nitty-gritty details. And sometimes they share it in such a way, there's a lot of bravado. Look how bad I was. Look how horrible I was. That's not what a step 4 is all about. It's to understand that column 4, to what character defects are in play. And another note to make with this paragraph is, I'm to give no names or details, nor am I to receive names or details. Once I start hearing names and details, it's very hard for me to forget. And then I become a garbage can for a lot of people's inventory. And you can get sick quickly if you allow yourself to be that kind of a vessel. Our job is to hear their moral inventory in a general way. The prospect knows the specifics, and they should know the specifics, but we as a sponsor don't need to know that. Okay, so we're to give no names or details, nor receive any names or details. So step 5 instruction, talk to the right person. It's important that they be able to keep a confidence, that they understand and approve what we're driving at, that they will not try to change our plans. Some sponsors love to play judge and jury. Oh, you're not ready for a step 5. You need to do more work. See me in 6 months. And they play this judge and jury. If you've got 1 item or 20 items and you need to get into those moral defects, let's set aside the time right now and let's hear that. And let's get those blocks out of the way, because we're messing with their relationship with God if we don't. And some sponsors really get off on this power they think they have over their prospects. When we decide who's to hear our story, we waste no time. We want to do it quickly. We have a written inventory and we're prepared for a long talk. We pocket our pride. We go to it, illuminating every twisted character, every dark cranny of the past. Are you willing to do this? And hopefully that's a yes. And that brings us to the step 5 promises. Now, once we've taken this step, withholding nothing, no half measures, we're delighted. There's a sense of relief. I'm no longer cowering in fear that I'm going to somehow be found out. I'm transparent and I'm delighted, and I can look the world in the eye, and I can be alone at perfect peace and ease with myself. That yap voices died down considerably. The fears fall from me and I begin to feel the nearness of my Creator. I'm drawing close to that power. And where I started off in step 2 with certain spiritual beliefs, now I begin to have a spiritual experience. And the feeling that the drink using or acting out problem will disappear, and it comes on strongly. I have no desire to drink, use, or act out. And I feel like I'm on that broad highway walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Now, the whole point of this process is to figure out this ledger on page 18. I'll share with you mine. This is mine. This is what came out of my inventory. And I can share this with you because it's done in a general way. There's nothing here you're going to blackmail me with, or, the details of my transgression. It's a general moral inventory. And so I go through my list, and this describes what the bondage of Cameron looks like. And these are my specific character defects that I've identified. And some of them weren't listed, so I added sarcasm, cynicism. Epicaricacy, that's taking pleasure in other people's misfortune. It's an awful character defect. Misanthropy, the loathing of my own species. Prejudice, unfair biases, and indiscretions. This is my resume as an untreated addict. I'll never forget my sponsor saying, "That's your resume, Cameron. That's who you are." Next time you go for a job interview or put up an eHarmony profile, you show them that list, because that's who they're getting. And I found that really objectionable. But the great thing about a step 4 and 5 and getting right with ourselves, we figure out the spiritual principles. What God's job, this is God's job description for me. And here's another paradox. God hires people with the worst resumes to do his work. Is that not a paradox? And now I got a track to run on. I understand what the bondage of Cameron looks like in my step 3 prayer. And more importantly, when I'm meditating on what is God's will for me today in all my affairs, I have a list of principles that I can meditate and embody and visualize and execute throughout my day. And so I get right with myself. If all we needed was to understand our character defects and our spiritual principles, we'd only have 5 steps. But behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, behavioral modification doesn't work for me. So I need a spiritual intervention. And so step 6 and 7 is about getting right with God. So if you look at the top of page 19, we were entirely ready, no half measures, to have God remove these character defects. Why God? Because behavioral modification doesn't work for me. So we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour to meditate, to review our inventory. What are we meditating or reflecting on? All that we have done. We ask ourselves, is our work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Is my steps 1 through 5 firmly in place? Have I skimped on the cement put into the foundation? Have I tried to make mortar without sand? And if I can answer to my satisfaction, then I'm ready to look at step 6. Now, the step 6 instruction says we emphasize willingness as indispensable, meaning I'm a loser without it. So am I now ready to have God remove all the things that I've admitted in my column 4 that are objectionable? And the question I meditate on is, do I see how futile, fatal, and destructive that 4th column is in my life? And as a result, I circled yes. Can God now take them all, every one? Is there anything in that 4th column you want to hold on to? I don't want to hold on to any of it. I want God to take it all. So are you now ready to have God remove all your defects of character? It's like God drives a garbage truck. He pulls up, and I put all my character defects in the back of the truck, and God drives on without them, or with them. And they vanish like a fart in the wind. But there are certain character defects that if I argue for them, God says, well, you get to keep them. Right? So hence the next line, when I argue for my character defects, congratulations, I get to keep them. And that's why I revisit certain resentments from time to time, or certain fears, because I hold on to certain defects. I argue for them. And it's through inventory that I rub my own nose in my own shit to see how futile, fatal, and destructive they are. And that helps me to break it down, let it go more and more, and I try and make some spiritual progress in those areas. And it goes on to say, if we still cling to something that we will not let go, we're given this step 6 prayer for willingness. God, give me the strength to let go of this resentment. Give me the willingness and the surrender to let it go, and give me the strength to be accepting and forgiving and loving, right? And when we can answer yes, then we take a look. We've done our step 6. We're entirely ready. So now we move to step 7, where we're going to actually ask the divine to do it. So step 7 says we humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings. Again, we need God to do it because behavioral modification doesn't work for us, and a process of getting right with God. And so when we're ready, we say something like this. Now, I love this step 7 prayer. I start my day with the step 3 prayer and meditation, and I finish my day with the step 7 prayer and meditation. So when ready, I say, my Creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me, the good and the bad, all of my column 5, all of my column 4. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character. God, please remove my. And then I go through my list of character defects thoughtfully and communing with this power, meditating on the destructiveness of these character defects, and I confess them to God. And I state, which stand in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellow beings. God, grant me strength, strengthen. And then I list the spiritual principles that I need strengthened in my life as I go out from here to do your bidding, because I'm in the God business now, not the Cameron business. And I do this every evening. Are you willing to do that? And if you are, you've taken step 6. When I do step 3 and step 7 with the prospect, I take them through the step, and then I get them to take me through the step. You should try it. We do it in the regular workshop when I'm working with other facilitators. It's a very powerful dynamic. In the book of James, which is in the New Testament, which was the book the original alcoholics used to work with before the big book was written. There's a passage in James 5, I think it's verse 13. It says, share your sins with one another. Pray for one another. Righteous prayer has tremendous healing quality. To share our transgressions with one another, confess to one another, and to pray for one another. One of my favorite passages that comes out of the book of James, which is step 12, verse 19 and 20, it says, if a person should lose their way from God and another person shows them the path back to God, that person will not only have saved a soul, but cover a multitude of sin. And that's where our step 12 comes from. Okay, so that's 6 and 7. We come to steps 8 and 9. This is a process where we get right with others. Step 8, we make a list of all the persons we've harmed and whom we're willing to make amends to them all. No half measures. Now we need more action. NHM, no half measures, without which we find faith without works is dead. That's also from the book of James. Let's look at steps 8 and 9. We have a list of persons that we have harmed, that we did when we listed our column 1, and we're willing to make amends. Yes? We made it when we took inventory, when we did our harms inventory. Now in step 8, we take it one step further. 90% of the work you've already mapped out in your step 4 and 5 harm inventory. But in step 8, we take it one step further. So on the left-hand side, we write the person we've harmed. We list all the character defects we brought to that situation, how it affected them, and what did it unjustifiably arouse. And then in the right column, we list the spiritual principles we need to bring to that relationship. The extra step we take is we bring it into a reality now. So for example, I was never around for my wife. I was always out drinking with my business partner, and I was never home, and I never participated in the family. And there was a lot of, resentment and bitterness created as a result of that. So how can I set this matter right? What does that look like in step 8? So to show appreciation and respect to my spouse for being faithful, honest, unselfish, and helpful, I'll practice intimacy and be considerate of my spouse's needs and desires. I'll spend more time with my spouse. Everybody likes quality time, but kids and spouses want quantity time. They want a lot of your time. So I try and spend as much time as I can with my family. And I'll spend more time with my spouse, and I will help out with the household chores. I'll step up and help out, and I'll help out with the expenses, and I'll practice these principles on an ongoing basis. And I will ask this person, if I'm unsure how to make an amend, just ask the person, what more do I need to do to make this right? And let them tell you how to make the amend and arrange the best deal you can. Now, I've had a few people tell me to drop dead, and someday I hope to fulfill that amend, but not today. And so in step 8, we map it out. And then in step 9, we execute. Just like step 6, we get entirely ready. And step 7, we execute. Step 4, we map it out. And step 5, we execute. It's kind of a dynamic that the steps work in tandem with each other. So in step 9, what we want to do is we don't want to do any more harm than we've already done. So there's some guidelines when executing a step 9 amend. So step 9 says we made direct amends, one-on-one amends with such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. We do not injure anyone. We do not make our amends at other people's expenses to save our souls. That's not the point of the amend. Sometimes we hear an addict say the only thing they need to do is keep sober. Well, they certainly must keep sober because there won't be any home or family if they do not. But they're a long way from making good to those whom they have so shockingly treated. The rule is we must be hard on self, but always considerate of others. These steps are to harm no one. Now, we subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal by this point. Would you agree? The process we're going through, it's a fairly drastic self-appraisal. Now we go out to repair the damage we've done in our past, and we attempt to sweep away the debris, the harm done, which is accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. There's a step 9, short prayer for willingness. God, give me the willingness. Give me the willingness to do this. I had an amend to make, and I knew what I had to do, and I didn't want to do it. And I had to really pray for the willingness to execute that amend. But it came, and it worked out really well. Remember, it was agreed at the beginning we'd go to any length, no half measures, for victory over our alcohol, our drugs, or acting out behavior. So the first thing we want to look at are resentments. You can make a note beside resentments. Eat humble pie fresh. The longer it sits, the worse it tastes. Whenever I make a mistake, especially with my wife, I better eat my humble pie as quickly as possible, because if I let it sit and stew, it tastes awful the longer it sits. So eat humble pie fresh. The longer it sits, the worse it tastes. Now, when it comes to resentment, some of us might have some misgivings. The question of how to approach a person we've hated will arise. They may have done us more harm than we've done them. We might have acquired a better attitude by this point, but we're not too keen on admitting our faults to them. Nevertheless, with the person we dislike, we take the bit. We go to them in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feeling, expressing our regrets. Under no condition do we criticize that person or argue with them, right? Otherwise, we've got more paperwork, more amends, and more humble pie to eat. We sweep off our side of the street. Their faults are not discussed. We stick to our own. So when I go to someone that I've transgressed against, that I've been angry towards, and they've been privy to that anger, I go to them and I confess my column 4. I was wrong. I was judgmental. I was reactive. It was really selfish and self-seeking on my part. I really regret my aggressive and angry behavior. It will not be repeated. What more can I do to make this right between us? That's how I approach a lot of my resentments. So I don't grovel. I don't, cower or get awkward about it. I just look at my part of the street and I put it out there and I try and right the wrong. And I found most people are I never ask for forgiveness. What's wrong with going to someone and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, please forgive me," right? I've heard people think that's an amend. I've screwed them over, and now not only have I screwed them over, I'm asking them to forgive me. There's nothing unselfish about that approach. Reframing our resentments so we can practice acceptance and then forgiveness and love. The book gives us a really poignant forgiveness prayer. It says, this was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Would you agree with that? And though we didn't like their symptoms and the way they disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. Absolutely. So I asked God to help show me how I can exercise some tolerance and some pity and some patience towards them, that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. And when a person offends me, I say to myself, this is a sick person. God, how can I be helpful? Save me from being angry. Don't say to the person, obviously, you're a sick person. How can I be helpful to you? Otherwise, you'll be putting sarcasm down as one of your column 4 defects. So that's how we handle our resentments. We reframe them, move to a position of acceptance, forgiveness, then love. And here's what I found. Whenever I get to a position of forgiveness around a resentment, the amend becomes very clear to me. But as long as I'm angry, I can't see it. You don't want to go to a person and make an amend while you're still angry, because if they go off on you, chances are you're going to go off on them, and now you got more paperwork, more amends, and more humble pie to eat. Okay, item 2, money. Properly appointed authority for money, accountants, debt counselors. Most addicts owe money. If you work with drug addicts, they owe a lot of money. We do not dodge our creditor. As my good friend Camilla would always say, take the call, pay your bills. It's a pretty straightforward amend. We must lose our fear of creditors no matter how far we have to go, for we're liable to drink, use, or act out if we're afraid to face them. Criminal matters, item 3. The lawyer is the properly appointed authority. Some of us might have committed criminal offense that'd land us in jail if it were known. Though our reparations take a numeral form. The one thing I love about column 5 is it gives us a very broad highway in which to apply spiritual principles. There are some general principles we find guiding, reminding ourselves we decided to go to any lengths, no half measures, to follow the recipe to find a spiritual experience. We ask God, we ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences may be. We might lose our position, our reputation, face jail, but we are willing. We must not shrink. But there's a caveat here. We must be ready to face and take accountability for our transgressions, but not at other people's expenses. We don't sacrifice others to save our own souls. And I've seen people do that, and I'll use an example when I come to execution in a minute. We're given fears are obviously going to pop up. And again, the big book gives us a prayer on how to handle fears. Instead, we let God demonstrate through us what it can do. We ask God to remove our fear, direct our attention to what it would have us be, and at once we commence to outgrow fear. Notice nowhere in the book does it say call your sponsor. It always says go into prayer, go into meditation, recognize defects, recognize spiritual principles. Sex relationships. Chances are we have domestic troubles. I certainly did. Perhaps we're mixed up with others in a fashion we wouldn't care to have advertised. Don't share sex conduct at meetings. The meetings are not safe to do that. Don't do that. Again, that's an intimate, confidential thing. And the properly appointed authority for sex conduct is God. Your sex conduct is between you and God. You want to stay out of your prospect sex issues because it brings you into triangles, and triangles are very messy. You don't want to get caught up in that. So our prayer for sex amends, we ask God to mold our ideals to help us live up to them. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answers will come if we want it. Our motive, I want answers. I want to make this right. And in prayer and meditation, those answers are going to come. We earnestly pray for the right ideal, for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity, strength to do the right thing. Now, if sex is troublesome, not only sex, if drugs or alcohol or any other acting out addiction is troublesome, what do? We throw ourselves the harder into helping others. When I get off Cameron and I focus on you, all my little plans and designs are no longer important. And I forget about all the things I could get resentful because all I'm doing is being helpful to you. It breaks that cycle of self-reflection and going down that rabbit hole of resentment. I turn my thoughts to being helpful to others, my step 12. I think of their needs, I work for them. And it takes me out of myself. It quiets that imperious urge to act out. Because when to yield to it means heartache, it means more paperwork, and it means more amends. Now, before we execute a step 9, on page 24, just across the top of your page, write consent, consult, meditate. Consent, consult, meditate. Before taking drastic action, which might implicate others, we secure their consent. Now, I knew a guy that hadn't paid his taxes in 10 years. He's doing step 9. He goes off half-cocked, calls up Revenue Canada, said, look, I've been a hopeless alcoholic for 10 years. I'm a little short in my account. I hope that's okay. I will make it good at some point. Revenue Canada, being the sensitive people they are, they froze his bank account. They seized his home. They evicted him and his wife and the kids. The wife got pissed. She got a divorce. She took custody of the children, and he went out on a bender to end all benders. Now that's being a dork. Was there a better way? What do our instructions tell us? If we've obtained permission, that means we got a yes. Honey, I got to pay my taxes. The thought of being caught's going to drive me to drink. She might have said, you know what, honey, that's a good idea. But why don't you put the house in my name since I've been paying the mortgage these past 10 years? And the second thing, have you consulted with others? Have you consulted with the properly appointed authority? Have you consulted with a tax lawyer to have proper representation? And then the third thing, have you asked God to help? And the drastic step is indicated. So when all three ducks line up and are congruent, and we realize intuitively this is the right course of action, then we execute our amend. You'll find your amends will go a lot more productive and a lot more beneficial and a lot more helpful if you practice prudence on this passage, this paragraph of instruction. Yes, there's a long period of reconstruction ahead. I'm still doing my amends. We must take the lead. A remorseful mumbling that we're sorry won't fill the bill at all. My wife never wanted to hear, I'm sorry, ever again. The spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. Our behavior will convince them more than our words. My wife just wants to see column 5 demonstrated in her life for the rest of my life. That's my amend. And that convinces her far more than any words I could come up with. Remember that 10, 20 years of drunkenness or addiction will make a skeptic out of anyone. Who's your biggest skeptic? My wife was my biggest skeptic. And she was skeptical for 6 years. And I had to really suck it up and practice my step 9 and make right because I'd done so much damage. But I stuck it out. And now we have a really amazing relationship together, celebrating 32 years of marriage this year. But she was very skeptical of my behavior in sobriety for the first 6 years. Sometimes we do a lot of damage and it takes a while. There may be some wrongs we can never fully right. I worked with a man who in a drunk drove over a woman and made her a quadriplegic. How do you make right such a wrong? That's a horrible thing to live with. He went to jail. He has restraining orders preventing any conduct. How do you live with that? How can we find some way through this? And thank God for God, because God forgives and God extends a grace. And the passage here says, we don't worry about them if we can honestly say to ourselves, we right them if we could. If in our heart of hearts, we truly atone for that transgression and work hard at making right my life and with God, God bestows a certain grace upon me that allows me to shoulder the burdens of my past. I can't give back the time I took from my children when they were growing up as a drunk and an addict. All I can do is do my best now to be the best father I can be to them. And in doing so, and truly regretting and atoning for my sins, God gives me a grace to shoulder those burdens of the past. And there's a way through it. Some people cannot be seen. We send them an anonymous letter. Today we got Facebook, email, Zoom, Messenger, phone, WhatsApp, text, lots of ways to connect to people. We don't delay if it can be avoided. We should be sensible, tactful, considerate, humble. These are column 5 principles. Without being servile, we don't grovel, or scraping, that is being quarrelsome with the people we're approaching. As God's people, we stand on our feet. We don't crawl before anyone. Promises. Now, we've heard these mentioned in the rooms ad nauseum. Some people think this is, just the promises that get fulfilled for showing up at meetings. But these are step 9 promises. If we're painstaking, no half measures about this phase, step 9, of our development, we're going to be amazed before we're halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom, a new happiness. We're not going to regret the past nor shut the door on it. Man, this is a good deal. We're going to comprehend the word serenity and know peace. How many want that kind of power? The feelings of uselessness and self-pity are going to disappear. It just gets better and better. We lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking slips away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life changes, and fear of people and economic insecurity leaves us. Man, it's just promise, promise, power, power. It's a great deal. We intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us. Our consciousness is awakening. We're waking up. We're being rocketed into that fourth dimension of existence. And we suddenly realize that God's doing for us that we couldn't do for ourselves. Do you want this experience in your life? Yes or no? Steps 1 to 9. Look at the power we're building. Step 1, there is no power. We die. Step 2, we know there's power out there. We see it working in others. Step 3, we make a decision to go look for the power. Step 4 and 5, we figure out what blocks us from power, what gives us access to power. Step 6 and 7, we get right with the power for change. Steps 8 and 9, we take these spiritual principles, make reparations to our past, and we're rocketed into this fourth dimension of existence. Now, the question is how do we stay here? How do we grow in effectiveness and understanding? And that is what step 10 is all about. Now, step 10 at the top of page 25 says we continue to take personal inventory. This is a process, not an event. When we were wrong, we promptly, we quickly, fast admitted it. So a note you can make at the top of page step 10, check yourself before you wreck yourself. I love that. That's what I do daily. I better check myself before I wreck myself. Step 10 suggests we continue to take personal inventory, continue to set right new mistakes as we go along. Are you willing to do this? We vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. Are you willing to do this? Now, here's the thing. We get our prospect through step 9. They map it out. They're executing their 8s and 9s. But we don't cut them loose for a while. We immediately get them into step 10 so that they're keeping today clean and not adding to their past, as it says here. We're cleaning up the past while we're living in step 10. And look at the number of steps we're working in one paragraph of text. Step 4, when we continue to take personal inventory. Step 9, when we look at cleaning up our past. And we've entered the world of the spirit. Some of you may be already experiencing that right now. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. This is not an overnight matter. Remember, it's a process, not an event. And it should continue for our lifetime. Remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. I meet a lot of sprinters, and they're not around anymore. This is a marathon program for life. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. Those are your step 4 character defects. When they crop up, what do? We ask God at once to remove them. That's steps 3 and 7. We discuss them with someone immediately, either a properly appointed authority or a big book sponsor. There's your step 5. And make amends, steps 8 and 9, quickly if we've harmed anyone. And then we resolutely turn our thoughts, resolutely, no half measures, to someone we can help. Love and tolerance of others is our code. And that means less paperwork and less amends. And I don't know about you, but I don't like doing paperwork. So I try to live my day as loving and tolerant as I possibly can be. Now, step 10 promises. This is a spiritual epistemology. How do you know you're having a spiritual experience? Well, this next paragraph describes what it's like to live in step 10, to be rocketed into this fourth dimension. We cease fighting anything or anyone, even our addictive behavior. Now, most programs say we avoid people, places, and things, but our instructions say we cease fighting it. We're in that position of neutrality. For by this time, sanity will have returned. There's our step 2 promise fulfilled, sanity. We're seldom interested in liquor, drugs, acting out behavior. If tempted, we recoil from it like a hot flame. The thought of polluting this temple is unthinkable. I think of my body like an ark or a temple, and I try to feed it with good foods. I don't smoke. I try to keep the temple clean so I can grow that divine presence. And the thought of polluting it with alcohol or drugs is just like, it's unthinkable. I recoil from it like a hot flame, and I react sanely and normally and find that this has happened automatically. There was never a choice. When I was untreated, there was never a choice. I was always compelled to drink, use, or act out. And in sobriety, in my relationship with this power, I still don't have a choice because I wake up and I have no desire to do it. Or I'm able to easily control that desire. And we'll see that our new attitude towards drugs or liquor or obsessive compulsive behavior has been given to us without any thought or effort. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. It's like being in the eye of the storm. You ever been in a hurricane? If you're in the eye, it's clear, beautiful, calm skies. Even though you got hundreds of mile an hour destructive winds all around you, if you're in the eye, you're safe and protected. I have a shit show that goes on in life from time to time, but I don't get caught up in it. I'm safe and protected. I'm centered. I'm in that neutrality, centered with God. I'm protected by that divine consciousness that allows me to proact rather than react. I've not even sworn off and said the problem has been removed by this divine consciousness. It does not exist for us. We're neither cocky. Caveat, big shotism kills us. A lot of people think when they get involved in the program, they become big shots. You know, I remind myself, the best I can ever be is this little minnow in a dirty puddle. There's no glory in it for me. I try to be helpful. And, you know, and don't get me wrong, I love the accolades that people give to me from time to time, but I don't do it for that reason. I'm making amends and making reparations for the damage I've done and trying to be helpful and being one of God's servants in life. And I keep it humble. That's why I share my inventories with you. That's why I put the pen to paper a lot. It keeps me in that position of humility. Big shotism kills a lot of addicts. All of a sudden they start buying their own press, and then the next thing you know, they're relapsing or, you know, resting on their laurels. This is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. We do that through steps. So here's the note to make at the end of step 10. Be mindful throughout your day. Be mindful throughout your day. You execute your day after your step 3 meditation. So be mindful throughout the day and ask yourself, am I living in column 4 or column 5? Am I living in power or am I living in no power? Am I living my way or God's way, right? Am I living in column 4 or column 5? Remember to correct your course. Throughout my day, I drift back into column 4, get caught up in Cameron's little plans and design. Do you know when a jet takes off from Toronto Pearson Airport and flies to LA, that's a 5-hour flight. And you may not know this, but during that 5-hour flight, the plane is off course 95% of the time. Yet it still manages to arrive in LA in 5 hours, given a tailwind or a headwind. How is that possible? It's because the co-pilot and the pilot are always conferring with one another, checking their gauges, conferring with ground crews, always course correcting. That's the way I execute my program. I'm always course correcting. Am I in column 4? That's a bad place for me to be. It's futile, fatal, destructive. And I course correct back into column 5. And I have a process, a design for living that allows me to do that. So remember to correct your course. Now on page 26, you can print these off your workbook. This is the weekly program of action. I have 3 levels of handling my inventory during the day. Now, sometimes I can just brush it off. I realize, oh, that's an irritable thought, or that's a hateful thought. I recognize it. I brush it off, and it's done with. That's all I need to do. So the first level is a brush off. But sometimes a thought or something will come up, and it's a little more entrenched. Now I need to pause and pray and meditate. And then I get rid of it, course correct. Sometimes it gets under my skin and I've done damage and I'm angry and I can't let it go. Then I put pen to paper and I discuss it with someone. So those are the ways I handle my inventory. Sometimes I can brush it off. Sometimes I need to pause and pray. And sometimes I need to put pen to paper and discuss it. And that's how I approach my daily program of action so that I can arrive with God at the end of every day. When I do my step 7 prayer and meditation review, I realize I've been living God's way throughout my day, and there's a tremendous paycheck that goes with that. the first one being easily able to control my desire to drink, use, or act out. Step 11, we got a bonus here. This is the first time we've tried this. And my good friend Camilla, what a wonderful spiritual spearhead of God's ever advancing creation. We used to go through the step 11 narrative intellectually, but I asked Camilla if she would take that lovely voice of hers and some meditative music and go through the narrative, but as a centering. So we're going to do that right now. I'm going to play it for you. This is our debut of it, and I hope you like it. And if you do like it, send me an email, and I'll send you the step. I'll send you this this prayer and meditation to you. So if you want to sit in an open body position, straighten your spine, allow ourselves to open up to a divine consciousness. And we're going to enjoy this meditation that Camilla put together. It's just a little over 10 minutes, and then we'll wrap up with step 12, and we should be done within the next 20 minutes. So here we go. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did.
Step 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood it. Praying only for knowledge of its will for us and the power to carry that out. Step 11 suggests prayer, talking to God, and meditation, listening to God. When we tire at night, we constructively review our day. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? Do we owe an apology? Have we kept something to ourselves, which should be discussed with another person at once? Were we kind and loving toward all? What could we have done better? Were we thinking of ourselves most of the time? Or were we thinking of what we could do for others? Of what we could pack into the stream of life? But we must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection, for that would diminish our usefulness to others. After making a review, we asked God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. On awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, we can employ our mental faculties with assurance. For after all, God gave us brains to use. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. In thinking about our day, we may face indecision. We may not be able to determine which course to take. Here we ask God for inspiration, an intuitive thought, or a decision. We relax and take it easy. We don't struggle. We are often surprised how the right answers come after we have tried this for a while. Self-will test. Is it dishonest, resentful, selfish, or fearful? God's will test. Is it honest, pure, unselfish, and loving? We usually conclude the period of meditation with a prayer that we be shown all through the day what our next step is to be, that we be given whatever we need to take care of such problems. We ask specially for freedom from self-will and are careful to make no request for ourselves only. We may ask for ourselves, however, if others will be helped. We are careful never to pray for our own selfish ends. Many of us have wasted a lot of time doing that, and it doesn't work. As we go through the day, we pause. When agitated or doubtful, and ask for the right thought or action. We constantly remind ourselves we are no longer running the show. Humbly saying to ourselves many times each day, "Thy will be done." We are then in much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, or foolish decisions. We become much more efficient. We do not tire so easily, for we are not burning up energy foolishly as we did when we were trying to arrange life to suit ourselves. It works. It really does.
How about that? That was a really nice way to go through the Step 11 presentation. I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. It's kind of wild the way we plow through the steps, and there's lots of energy and lots of narrative. And then we hit Step 11 and it's like gearing down and getting centered before we wrap up the presentation with Step 12. So if anyone would like that centering, just drop us an email and we'll be sure to get it out to you. And thank you, Camilla, for the time and effort you put into creating that for us. I think it's an amazing addition to the 12 steps in 4-hour presentation, and can't help but do lots of good. So thank you. Okay, brings us to the top of page 29. Right across the top, I want you to write, "I am going to be a sponsor." Having had a spiritual awakening. Are you having a spiritual awakening, folks? As a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message, this recipe, to alcoholics, to addicts, and practice these principles in all our affairs. If you want to make a note here, all of our affairs, I have a priority list. Family first. Take care of what God has given you. Then work. You got to be self-supporting, otherwise you can't take care of family. And then in your spare time as an avocation, we carry the message to the addict that still suffers. That's a good balanced program. Family, job, newcomer. Practical experience shows that nothing ensures immunity as from drinking, using, or acting out as intensive work, no half measures, with other addicts. It works when other activities fail. What are the activities that fail? See your log and loser list. This is our 12th suggestion. Carry this message, carry this recipe to other addicts. Are you willing to do this? Hopefully that's a yes. You can help when no one else can. Everybody's failed the addict, but we have a solution. We can secure their confidence. We can share our log list. We can share our loser list, and they realize, hey, I'm like you and you're like me, but you don't do it anymore. God, I want what you got. And we can take them on that amazing journey as we go out to touch the face of God. And remember that they're very ill. Others fail. And remember, the people we work with are ill. So keep your wits about you when you're working with others. I love Zoom. It's a great buffer. It's safe for you. It's safe for me. If you work with others face to face, work in a public place, especially if you work with the opposite sex. Always do your work in a public place, like a cafe or what have you, for your protection, their protection. Because some people we work with can be dangerous and very sick. there's a passage in Matthew. It says, behold, I send you out as sheep amongst the wolves. Be wary like serpents, but gentle like doves. Keep your wits about you, but be helpful. This seemed to prove that one addict could affect another addict as no non-addict could. It also indicated strenuous work, no half measures. One addict with another was vital to permanent recovery. That's what you want, isn't it? Permanent recovery. If you don't want permanent recovery, be a log hopper. But if you want permanent recovery, nothing ensures immunity as working with others. I soon found that when all other measures failed, being my log list, work with another addict would save the day. My experience is big book sponsorship works. Bill W., the broker, and others worked hard, again, no half measures with many addicts, on the theory that only an addict could help another addict, but succeeded in only keeping sober himself, and suddenly realized in order to save themselves, they had to carry their message to other addicts. Now that, I've heard some people say, I don't really care about you. I'm only going to work with you because it's going to be helpful to me. And I think, what an awful thing to say. Bill and Bob realized that working with others would save them, but that was never their primary motive. Their primary motive was to do God's will, to be helpful to others. And in doing so, God provides that grace and that position of neutrality and that power to let us easily control our desire to drink, use, or act out. And that's the key. You can make a note. You get to stay sober whether the newcomer stays sober or not. I don't have the power to sober you up. If I did, I'd make you all sober. All I do is broker the deal between you and God. But I find in my effort to be helpful to you, my sobriety always gets taken care of. And that's the key behind sponsorship. It's got a 75% or better efficacy rate. We've recovered and been given the power to help others. Look at the power we have in step 12. Everybody's failed the addict, but we come along armed with the facts about ourselves, our common solution, and a generosity of spirit. We heal the seemingly hopeless. That's power. God wields a power through us where he literally turns us into spiritual healers, and we heal the seemingly hopeless. You can't save everybody though. So there's a little analogy I use. It's called the starfish story. A couple of blokes are walking along the seashore and the tide's gone out. There's starfish everywhere. The sun's hot. It's drying them up, killing them by the millions. And this one fellow keeps bending over and picking up a starfish and tossing it back in the ocean. And his buddy says, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm saving the starfish." He says, "Saving starfish? Look around you. There's millions of them dying. You're not making any difference." And he thought about that, and he bends over and he picks up a starfish. He says, "You're probably right, but it makes a big difference to this starfish right here," and tosses it back in the drink. That's the way we work. Work with what God puts in front of you. That's your starfish. Focus on them. Show them how to work it. Show them how to connect to a higher power. You just might save a soul. But if you're shaky, doesn't say call your sponsor or go to a meeting. It says if you're shaky, you better work with another addict instead. And the promise is life will take on new meaning. To watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch newcomers recover, to see them help other newcomers, and to see them help other newcomers, man, that's an experience you don't want to miss. Loneliness vanishes. A fellowship of big book sponsors grow up about us. We have a host of big book sponsor friends, and it's an exciting experience. To watch someone so far down in the hole climb out of that hole as a result of you showing them the message, man, that's an experience you don't want to miss. Frequent contact, no half measures, with newcomers and each other's, other big book sponsors, is the bright spot of our lives. Create your own 100. I remember I told Nikki, one of the spiritual gangsters, go out and create your own 100. And you know what she did? She put together a fellowship of 2,000 plus people. She's created her own 100 20 times. Like, man, I just say big doors swing on very small hinges. And that woman just opened up an entire fellowship. What a miracle to behold. And that's a bright spot in my day. And it's a miracle to see it in action. Look at what you can do. You find a person who wants it, help them get well. Then the two of you find two others. Now there's four. The four find eight, 16, 32, 64, 128. You got 100 before you know it. It's pretty amazing. All right, a vision for you as we wrap up. It's easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. 3 notes. Don't get cocky. 2, laziness kills addicts. And 3, stay green, stay growing. When you're green, you grow. When you're ripe, you rot. And when you're blue, you're through. I don't want to be part of the ripe and the rotting and the blue and the through. So I like to stay green and growing. I throw the poetry in as a bonus. We're headed for trouble if we do, because our addictive behavior is a subtle foe. Remember, the liar's out to kill us. The liar wants us to use again, wants us to act out. The liar's out to kill us. So what we have is we're not cured of our addiction. We put the liar into remission. What we have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual program. Every day, no half measures, is a day when we carry our vision of God's will, that column 5, those spiritual principles, into all our activities with family, in our careers, and with newcomers. How can I best serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. These are the thoughts, column 5, which must go with us constantly. We can exercise our willpower along this line all we wish. It's the proper use of the will. Our proper use of the will, we never lose our willpower. It's a question of motive. Do I use my willpower to live in column 4, snatching all I can get out of the show, or to use all my willpower to do God's will? That's the proper use of the will. In conclusion, we feel the elimination of drinking, using, or acting out is but a beginning. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us in our respective homes, our families, our occupations, our job, and our affairs, like newcomers. Thus we grow, and so can you, though you be but one person with this book in your hand. We believe it and hope it contains all you need to begin. Some of you might be thinking here today, hey, I'm jittery, I'm alone, I couldn't do that. But I want you to know that you can. You have your narrative. You have your experience. The newcomer has theirs. You bring those 3 elements together, you're going to see a miracle take place. And give it a shot, folks. Business is booming. You're not going to mess them up any more than they're already messed up. So throw them a frickin' bone. Show them how to work it. You just might save a soul. I know you can do it, because you now know how to tap a source of power much greater than yourself, greater than the booze, greater than the drugs, greater than the acting out behaviors. And to duplicate what we've done here over these 2 nights with such backing of what we've accomplished together, it's only a matter of patience and willingness and labor. So remember, recovery from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body is possible by working the 12 steps as directed in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous every day. There's much more work ahead. This is just the beginning. Remember not to get cocky or lazy. Trust God, clean house, help others. And that, folks, is how I take the newcomer through the 12 steps in 4 hours. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present.